Hey, I'm doing this again, but with some slight changes from last time. See, last time I did mini reviews talking about recent media I'd consumed. It was actually all recent material, more or less. I was a little later than I wanted to be with getting my thoughts on Invincible, for example, out there, but it was still pretty recent at the time. This time I'm including stuff that I've had recent opinions on, or recently consumed for the first time, even if they're, substantially older. As always, this is my opinion, just talking through my ideas. I'm sure I'll change my mind in one way or another on all of these topics in the future, so long as I go back to them. So I hope you find the topics interesting. You don't have to agree with anything. As of me finally wrapping up this script, it's been several weeks since I consumed half this shit, and now other stuff is out now that I also intend to look into. I'll probably be watching the new Suicide Squad in a week or so with my buddy Seabass. I'll see if I can get him into a video so we can have someone with an actual personality talking instead of just me. To start with, most recent media on the list. By now, I guess that'd be the Loki TV show. Okay, so I think this is one of the better Marvel things I've seen in a while. Granted, having not seen a lot of the more recent content on account of hearing mixed and generally mediocre things about all of them. I watched, very recently, after watching Loki, I tried to watch WandaVision. I had already heard a lot of, people talking about it and have a general idea of the structure and what happens and various criticisms of it. But yeah, I tried to watch the first episode, and I mean, immediately I'm struck with, it's very clear that the best part of the show is the gimmick, I guess, the sitcom parody-esque things, but they're not good parodies or deconstructions of sitcoms. They're just kind of the experience was just like watching a boring-ass sitcom. The jokes aren't funny. Nothing I'm watching is particularly interesting. I think conceptually, if I was just reading about it, it would work, but actually watching the episodes is not engaging. So I stopped watching the first episode very quickly. My standard for TV shows is the feeling of, how bored I get while watching, since my boredom sensors are very finely attuned to getting bored of shit quickly. I think the middle of Loki is pretty weak. Episodes 1, 2, and 6, off the top of my head, are the clearly more interesting ones. In the middle, where the characters are in, generic conflicts that progress in a predictable manner, are not very interesting. I've been noticing this a lot lately, where certain hiccups in plot feel like a minor detour, but then I look at the total runtime of the media and realize that I'm actually supposed to see these events as, a big deal, a significant portion of the show. For instance, when Loki goes into a portal at the end of episode 2, I figured this would just be a little minor detour, get resolved quickly so we could get back to hanging out in the office, talking about fucking time travel with Owen Wilson. The good part of the show. But Loki being stuck on this, random, unimportant planet, very shortly after that, is actually, basically a third of the total runtime of the show. It's not significant enough to feel like it matters in the plot, but it also wastes too much time for what it is, and I would have preferred if it was just cut down a bit, period. I mean, the same thing happens with, Alioth, where they go into the world, and it's treated as, this big thing, this substantial development in the plot, that they're stuck in this, reality where everything gets destroyed, but it's just Alioth is introduced and then dealt with and cast aside in a single episode. And I know they bring him up in the final episode, but it's so weird that they just randomly introduce this sentient being that we're supposed to see as special in some way, beyond just the rules or the laws of the time travel that the universe has in store. And it's just baffling, because it's they don't have enough development to signify Alioth or anything that's happening as a substantial anything. It's just not developed, and then they just get over with it, and it's it just feels bizarre. Let's see, Sylvie I think is really boring and generic as a character, just a typical tragic, can't trust anyone type of figure, very uninteresting. Boring, bad, ham-fisted romance between the two characters, just blah. There's also a really stupid plot point in the middle where the two Lokis, their romantic chemistry causes a deviation in the timeline, even though that makes no sense, because it would in no way alter the course of the doomed planet that they were on. But we'll get to that in a second. Also, this plot point about their fucking romance altering time and space, this plot point never comes up again in a meaningful way, and it is never explained in a way that makes any sense. Let's see. I can get this out of the way fast. By far and away, the biggest annoyance in this show, and this is probably the biggest problem in the show, is the technology of the TVA. This is actually infuriating while you're watching, because they are the strongest force in the entire universe. They can get as many Infinity Stones as they want. They can access all technology, all magic in every realm for all of time, backwards and forwards. But somehow, their only means of accomplishing anything when they enter the field is using these stupid fucking glowy batons. They don't seem to have technology to track things down or anything other than just looking for stronger deviations, which is not really explained how that technology works, but it's like literally just a normal person punching and kicking things is somehow capable of taking down these task forces of what is supposed to be the strongest power in the universe. They can't find anything they're looking for when they enter the area. They're somehow killed by, like, some fucking gasoline and a lantern when they set it up, and this is it. This is all you have to do to beat the agents of the strongest force in the universe. When Sylvie goes into the TVA, they're equally useless and unequipped, just more idiots with these dumbass batons that can just be disarmed, and then they can just be punched. Like, a group of Redditors could literally overthrow the TVA. This is baffling to me. Granted, the main bad guy, Kang, just like, or whatever this version of him is supposed to be called, whatever the fuck his name is. All of this goes according to his plan. So I guess anything that happens in the plot works out for him in the way that it's intended to, which is, in and of itself, really lazy writing contrivance. Just a shitty excuse that can be used to justify anything that could have happened in the story, no matter how little it served the narrative or how little sense it made, but whatever. Minor offense relative to the rest of it. As for other issues I had with the show, let's start with the obvious one that will be the case for almost all time travel media: plot holes and inconsistencies with the time travel mechanics. I've been noticing a trend in recent years where time travel and multiverse shit has kind of started to enter pop culture in a big way. And not that it already was, wasn't, but as a result, people are using the elements of what used to be sci-fi narratives and just appropriating them for more generic pop culture-y kind of stories that aren't really too concerned with sci-fi or wanting to be really accurate to these kind of rules. And sci-fi, especially philosophical sci-fi like time travel and multiverse shit, tends to be much less attuned to traditional sensibilities. Most sci-fi made for that kind of stuff is made without also trying to be a, really generic empowerment story about how you have free will. Most sci-fi is perfectly fine with presenting a universe where free will doesn't exist, where everything is deterministic, or you're just one variation of an infinite number of possible timelines. Sci-fi, a lot of sci-fi and time travel inherently asks the question, what if your default assumptions of how the world works are not necessarily accurate? This is why shit like, say, FF7R is an embarrassment to watch, because it doesn't understand the sci-fi concepts enough, and it's too obsessed with trite bullshit like saccharine shit, like, oh, I decide my own destiny, so fuck you, time and space, where time travel and space and multiverse stuff, rather than being actual rules that determine all of everything, including the people and their thought processes and their free will or anything. They just become another generic magic antagonist for the heroes to generically fight against and conquer. In Loki and many other series, this manifests as a complete inability to understand the concept of infinity. There's also some other issues like variance, for instance. 1. It doesn't make sense for variants to be captured and charged with crimes in a kangaroo courts of sorts. I guess the point that's never explicitly stated, but subtext would imply that the reason that they take people in and charge them with crimes is so that they can grab people and then brainwash them to become members of the TVA. Although you would think that people would recognize that if the people working there would recognize that the culprits they capture and bring in become agents of the TVA, you'd think they'd notice that, but whatever. They should just be considered physical matter that has gone off course, to be pruned with the rest of their Nexus event and their entire world, right? 2. It is never explained how variants even occur in the first place. Based on how I understand it, the main bad guy, alright, Kang, he just knows everything. For some reason, it's never explained. Like, even things beyond the sacred timeline, he just knows everything. I'm under impression that no one wrote anything to be the way it is. This is just how things happen, and he just knows that. I guess. And the TVA is taking credit for it happening as if they wrote it all. I mean, how can Kang influence things to go according to his plan? What are his actual physical influences in the world? Because it doesn't make sense how the bad guy could have influenced the course of all of history. The TVA can literally only influence things by going into branched timelines, or Nexus events, which are about to become branched timelines, and then destroying everything there. That is their only influence as far as we are shown, is what we see their Minutemen do in the field. But, with all of this, how do variants even happen? What the fuck is a variant? I mean, Loki became a variant not because time travel was happening in Endgame, but rather, that was completely irrelevant, the fact that the Avengers were using time travel, but because he bent down to pick up a box that landed nearby his feet, right? The physical action of seeing an object near his feet, picking it up, and then using it, that made him a variant. Why? How was he physically able to do that? If he wasn't ever intended to do that, how did it happen in the first place? Some of the other variants make more sense, right? Let's assume that this is a multiverse thing, where in fact, infinite timelines are running along the same path as at the same time. So in this one timeline, Loki is a black guy. I'm not sure how. Were his parents different? How can Loki be an alligator? Did the frost giants give birth to an alligator, or did some random alligator in the world happen to get the personality of Loki, and if so, how? How does that all work as a detour from the original timeline? Is Loki a matter of the actual character's personality, or a matter of lineage, or does it just have to be whoever is granted the title of the god of mischief in Asgard, no matter who it is? How does that work? But whatever. The old guy makes sense, right? The old Loki, he made a small deviation that didn't really affect the rest of the world in a meaningful way, and so he was able to grow old. I get how he could exist. Kid Loki, that also makes sense. Female Loki? Doesn't seem to make sense to me. If her crime was being just female, which I guess it seems like it might not be, but whatever. Okay, if her crime was just that she was a female Loki, then she should have been pruned when she was first born, obviously, not after she had lived for several years. They never state another crime that she had, although they might be implying that she did commit another crime against the timeline that they're just not telling us. Maybe it doesn't matter, who knows. So I can only assume that it's just because she was a girl. Now, there are two major problems with this according to time travel multiverse logic. Let's say that just variations are happening constantly all the time, because there's infinite timelines running with small little variations, okay? And when they get large enough, the TVA prunes them, right? That means that there are actually an infinite number of timelines that do still exist, with very minor differences. There is still an active multiverse. It's not just one timeline. In this universe, Loki is a black guy instead of a white guy. things like that. You know, in that sense, the entire purpose of the TVA still makes no sense. The TVA was made so that there would only be one fucking timeline, so that there can't be other timelines in existence that would go to war with each other. Even if they keep all the infinite timelines on the same script of how things should go, there are still infinite timelines at the same time, according to this logic. The universe where Loki is black could go to war with the universe where our Loki is from, etc. It doesn't matter if more or less the same events happened in both timelines. They're still separate timelines that can go to war, right? The whole conceit of the TVA makes no sense given this structure of the multiverse. And even in this structure, what if around, like, let's say 3000 AD or whatever, there's a variant of Kang that becomes a threat all by himself? He becomes a variant. Could he not have greater influence than... Okay, whatever, that's a minor point. As for the second major problem with this, it's the biggest problem with time travel in this show, it's the inability to understand the concept of infinity. Here's the thing about infinity. It's infinite. You know what 0.01% of infinity is? It's still infinity. That's how math works. If infinite timelines are running simultaneously, then if a variation pops up on one of them, that means that a variation has popped up on an infinite number of them. There should be infinite variants occurring at all times, everyone in the timeline. Not, oh, one fucking variant has popped up, let's go out there and get it. That's not how infinity works. Really, everything in the show operates without an understanding of how infinity works. But all of that is pretty common for these kinds of, like, wannabe time travel shows and movies that just use it as an exciting plot device rather than a really deep dive into these sci-fi and philosophical concepts. And, like, it's nearly impossible to write time travel into a story without having some plot holes and contrivances and the like, but whatever. Oh, speaking of which, I need to point out one of the biggest contrivances of all, beyond just, like, the bad guy just deciding to make all of this happen and inviting Loki and Sylvie to where he is, while also putting them through a bunch of bullshit for no real given logical reason, when in reality it doesn't seem like he even gives a shit what they do when they get there, so it's not like he had a plan, or it's not like he needed them to grow in any meaningful way first. And even if he did, why didn't he just pick someone else from the infinite number of timelines in all of time, from the beginning of time to the end of time? I'm sure there's a more qualified person than fucking Loki. Like, any person who is already ideal to serve whatever weird, completely unexplained purpose he wanted them to serve, but whatever. No. One of the real annoyances is Sylvie's enchantment ability. It's literally just magic. Asgardian magic. It is just a skill that can apparently be learned through practice by, like, anyone proficient in Asgardian magic, I guess. But it's weirdly capable of defeating everything within the TVA and countering all of their technology and all of their systems and everything. This one random Asgardian magic trick can defeat a creature in the void that has apparently never been stopped through all of time across infinity. Everything that shows up that they prune and send there for Goliath to destroy, which includes superheroes, which includes the Avengers in any timeline where they're variants, which includes fucking Infinity Stones. Everything gets sent there. All the power in the universe can be sent there. Nothing has ever stopped Goliath. All variants, all alternate realities, all of which are already infinite anyways, like I said. They all end up there forever, and yet no one that has entered the void has ever beaten this creature of fucking smoke. But this one random magic spell can apparently do the job for some reason. This one spell that Sylvie just randomly started practicing for completely unexplained. And again, that's not how infinity works. He would have infinite shit to eat the entire time. That wouldn't happen. I could complain about the contrivance of the weird focus the story has on Loki's, even though there's no real reason for Loki to be anyone special across all of time in the multiverse. But he's, like, the most variant and the most, like, survival-oriented person ever, I guess, apparently, even though he fucking died. But that's a contrivance I'm basically fine with. Like, whatever. It's a show about Loki. fine. I can tolerate that. But no. All that stuff is okay, and it doesn't handle time travel and the multiverse stuff any worse than I assumed it would. There are other plot holes that have to do with infinity, like the hiding places that are about to be destroyed in history. They don't make sense. Like, sure, let's say I do something before an earthquake happens that will wipe out a whole town. Well, nothing I do will change the outcome, so there's no evidence of a deviation going forwards, but that's only on a very particular scale, a small or a large scale. Let's get even broader. Let's talk about billions of years from now, when the sun goes out, the eventual fucking heat death of our solar system, and so on. Is that not a cataclysmic event that will destroy everything, and therefore, after that point, nothing will happen before it? Like, nothing that has happened on Earth before that point really matters after that point because it didn't change the eventual end result of the planet's destruction? If you go broad enough, everything will eventually end in an apocalypse. So it's not so much as actions taken during one that don't matter or are undetectable, but more so that they aren't on a small enough time frame, a small enough time scale to be noticed. Oh, also, the final episode is a little weird, because the bad guy explains why he did everything he did, and the explanation is literally the exact same thing we already knew from the TVA. We were told in episode 1. It's genuinely just the same shit we were already told. There was an interdimensional war. He stopped the other timelines from being birthed to prevent this war. Why do they treat this shit like it's some sort of big revelation? It's literally what we were already told, more or less. More than that, it's weird to me how once they know the TVA are all variants, once the TVA members like Owen Wilson, they lose complete faith in the TVA and decide to go against it and destroy it, which is very weird to me. It's bizarre that they don't stop and ask themselves, well, I mean, is the TVA actually doing something evil? Or, well, what if the TVA is still necessary? I mean, it doesn't really change the end goal of the TVA. They could still believe in the cause, even if they learn that they're all variants. But whatever. Because they were still doing what they said they were doing, which is genociding other timelines. That's always been the MO. They know this. But regardless of whether or not the TVA is a necessary practice to keep the universe safe at all, they learn the one little lie that the TVA told them, and they're like, oh, let's overthrow this whole thing. It must not be important. We must overthrow it. It must not be important. Now, all of a sudden, I care about free will. Which is weird. I mean, didn't they believe in the cause already? In the reasoning behind their work? Whatever. Now, under the basis of YouTuber audience confidentiality, which is not a thing, I felt obligated to tell you that Miss Minutes is very hot, and I'm not sure if that qualifies as furryism or what sub-branch of degeneracy that falls under. Of course, it's mostly just, Tara Strong with the hot accent, but still, I feel like some god out there is judging me right now, so. Okay, all that's over with. Let's talk about the thing that was by far and away what I was most disappointed by in this show. Loki, the god of mischief. There is little to no mischief in this show. Actually, a big problem with the story is that it presents itself like it's a battle of being trustworthy versus being someone that can't be trusted. Oh, all this trust. Oh, all these things about lies and stuff. But Loki doesn't really lie very much in this show. And when he does, it's really fucking obvious. He doesn't trick people hardly ever. Even small scale or large scale. There were so many times where I thought that he was tricking people. I thought that he had a larger, more galaxy brain plan. But no, he was just being a fucking loser. He barely uses his magic at all, even when he's allowed to use it. I know he's not allowed to use it in the TVA, but when he fights people, he just does boring ass fisticuffs and the occasional fucking random Johnny Cage fireball that he weirdly doesn't use more often. He doesn't create after images to trick people or manipulate people that he's fighting. There is so little trickster shit in this show. It's embarrassing. I'll be talking about Your Turn to Die a little bit later in this video, and in that, half of the characters in that game are more effective tricksters than anybody in this entire show is. So, From Your Turn to Die actually engages in a way that makes sense for a trickster. See, Loki has a line in episode 1 or 2 where he says that he likes when people know not to trust him because it opens up new possibilities to trick them, which is true. But he never does this in the show. At no point does he ever manipulate people or make an argument with an understanding that people don't trust him. He only just says things and then hopes that people believe him, and provides no evidence or compelling arguments to support the possibility that even if people don't trust him, that they might, buy into him, or at least manipulate them or misdirect them in some way. So Hiyori and other characters like him actually argue from the basis that they aren't trusted. They hide facts and possibilities and argue from a basis where their ideas need to be at least considered or feared before being dismissed. So actually seeks out argumentative leverage to use in his manipulations. Loki is not a trickster in this show. He's just a normal fucking guy. Saul Goodman has more compelling trickster abilities than Loki in this show, and it's much more effective when the characters are actually tricksters way more of the time, because it makes the parts where they're sincere that much more endearing.
Kinda. Yeah? Oh, no. This is so cute. Oh, God, I'm so kawaii right now. He's really the best worst boy. The worst best boy and the best worst boy. You really don't have the sacrifice? Aw. Aw, that's so cute. Aw, you're kind of being cute right now, So
yeah, the show weirdly tries to act like he's this elusive trickster character, and all this secrecy and constant trickery going on, but he's really not. He's just a pretty normal fucking guy in this show. They try to push this thing about lies and trust and everything, but they explore it so poorly, and they have so little actual dishonesty or complexity to the lies that are told that it just doesn't work. Oma Kokichi is a much better example of how to write a story around lies and trust, and an enigmatic figure that can never be trusted or forgiven. But still must be respected and considered. People must still listen to him. So, yeah, all that stuff talking about trust and lying doesn't really work for me, especially as the show goes on. I'm pretty sure Loki tells maybe one minor lie to Sylvie at one point in the story, if that, but Sylvie in the ending still acts like she can't trust him at all. This is obviously a disappointment more than a true criticism. I really wanted to see some long cons, some arguing lying points without using fallacies, but just using wit and engaging logic to make a compelling case for something, or just doing the magician thing of misdirection and arguing points to hide the true aim and manipulating people. But nope, basically no mischief in this show, in almost any form. Pretty good watch, though. Definitely not the worst time travel multiverse story I've seen. Loki as a character is really fun to watch, although I could do with more fucking mischief and trickery, even in just a basic fight. If he creates a projection of himself to distract enemies or anything, I'd appreciate that. Him and Owen Wilson have great chemistry in their scenes. The only real issue with these scenes, especially near the beginning, is it gets kind of old kind of fast, with the characters just being difficult, I guess you could say. I'm not dumb, you're dumb. No, I'm not dumb, you're dumb. And just more of Loki embarrassing himself and pointlessly, I'd prefer if they just got down to doing something productive a little faster. And if less of their scenes involved hearsay, oh, I do trust you, or oh, you are lying, because as we established, that's dumb and barely justified in the plot. And yeah, more than anything, the entire plot is one big contrivance. Everything that happened in the plot, in any plot, because Kang said that it had to happen that way, He doesn't give any real reason why anything happened the way it did, or why he wrote anything to happen the way it did. We just have to accept that anything we watched had to happen that way, because he said so. This is the ultimate form of contrivance. The plot is the plot because I said so. Generally, it's considered, how should I say this? Very bad writing to have your entire plot be one giant contrivance. Now, It's unclear to me if Kang was ever actually writing The Course of Time, or if it, just time plays out the way it does, and he just prunes everything that splits off from one timeline using his weird, unexplained ability to see everything. And then he keeps this timeline around for whatever reason. But if we're supposed to believe that he directed The Course of Time, and his words seem to imply that he did for the sacred timeline, given that he claims to have led the Lokis down their journey in this show somehow, although how he did this is unclear. Did he influence the Lokis to make the decisions he wanted them to make? Because the TVA agents just bumblefuck around and fail at everything they try to do in this show. So, if Kang has some influence, I don't get what that influence is, but whatever. The point is, if he can somehow direct the events of the world, then that also means that everything in this entire Marvel extended universe is now retroactively one big fucking contrivance. Why did Kang write history in such a way that Thanos killed but then unkilled half the universe's population? I don't know, bro, because he fucking said so. Everything since Iron Man 1 now is one gigantic contrivance. Hooray. Also, the score in the show is really good. Okay, Doki Doki Literature Club Plus. As a big fan of the original Doki Doki Literature Club, I gotta say, this version with some new content in it is, fine, I guess. The game as a whole is still good, but I can't say I wasn't expecting a bit more from this. One thing that this game clearly made for the Switch, right? So even when on PC, it uses a fake PC interface to do all the game file shenanigans. Which, it is utilized in a way because it's in-universe, it's diegetic, I guess, but I still find this inherently less impactful than having to go into your own computer's files to play with the game and see parts of the story. However, with several of my complaints with this version, this does have a caveat. This version has some hints that it was written around this new fake PC monitor that you use to play the game through. It's the monitor of some collection of people working at this mysterious company that is in charge of managing the people in the simulation. See, the secret emails you get in this game call the characters like Monica and the rest people in all circumstances. There's no direct evidence to suggest that these are all actually AIs manufactured by humans, or out of humans, rather. In fact, some of the wording makes it questionable if these people sending the emails back and forth are even human in what would be considered a real universe. Regardless, there is a plot reason for using the fake monitor. But anyways, I digress. Most of the new content in this version comes from the side stories, which are pretty substantial and take about as long as a quick playthrough of the main game would take to finish, to do all of them. And these couple secret emails you get, which I'll talk about, so far as my review requires me to voice my issues with them. As far as the side stories go, purely by themselves as narrative content, they're pretty underwhelming. There is nothing in this version that's as good as the original main game's content. The side stories are all very saccharine, which is fine to an extent, but the real problem with the writing is that almost every character is written in such a way where the majority of their dialogue in some scenes is comprised of explicit diegetic narration. They literally just explicitly state exactly what their characterization is, what their arc is, everything, in completely inhuman ways. The only character that I think works in this context is Sayori, in two fronts, actually. Sayori has a ton of comic relief in the side stories, and she's by far and away the most entertaining aspect of the side stories moment to moment, when she's actually there to be funny. But beyond that, Sayori's character drama, at least in the first episode or whatever, is stuff that she's dealt with for a long time chronologically. As such, it makes more sense for her to be able to explicitly describe her own personal situation and her personal feelings on the subject. But when, fucking Yuri or whoever just now has some sort of realization or new experience, but then they write a fucking book report on their own characterization and their own psychology and shit, that's not good writing. That's actually a common pitfall. I wouldn't call it a writing 101 thing per se, but it's a known mistake that writers need to be looking out for.
They do have some chemistry, but the writing is always so on the nose. Ani's written as a highly perceptive character, which is fine, but when all her interactions with Clay setting up their relationship just consist of explicitly stated direct characterization, I feel like I'm reading the outline of a story rather than the actual story.
And that's most of the side stories, to be honest. Characters just explicitly stating exactly what their character is all about, and what the narrative through line of their subplot is meant to express, and they all have flawless introspection. The problem with this is that the story doesn't actually express these themes. Instead, it's just the characters narrating their own characterization in ways that we couldn't come to through simple subtext and observation. I can't even remember what happens in most of these side stories, because what they talk about isn't necessarily explicitly based in the events of the story. See, even when you have, like, a monologue for an entire story, the monologue itself still expresses the characterization through subtext. What you have is an extremely simple plot. In this game, I mean, in the side stories. What you have is an extremely simple plot with extremely simple events and apparent motivations behind those actions, and then a bunch of explicit text talking about much more complex ideas than what you'd surmised from the actual events of the plot. But they aren't complex enough to be interesting on their own front. Like, if I just wanted to read a fucking self-help book or text on human happiness or philosophy, I'd read from an actual famous historic theorist. Characters narrating their own characterization and the lessons they need to learn with 100% accuracy is not only unrealistic and immersion-breaking, but also takes away the point of even having a story. Instead, just be the outline for a story, and it would have more organically expressed these ideas. It just sucks, man. So that's not good. That's not good to read through at all. Beyond that, and this is kind of a mixed bag complaint, but the characters contradict the original ones from the main game. Now, there's an email that you get that says the side story characters contradict the original, but I still find this to be kind of a weird cop-out excuse. For instance, Monica in the original was always portrayed as very confident and highly experienced as a lover of literature. She could describe the strengths and weaknesses of every member of the club and their preferred writing styles. And she consistently gave out very confident advice for how to improve one's own writing in different ways. She was obviously the most experienced writer of the group, for her to be able to make those statements with so much confidence as to what to do, how to improve, how to develop an affinity and love for the art craft. However, in these side stories, Monica is not a confident or experienced writer. One could say that after she realized she was in a game and could learn everything there was to learn in the world, she just gained all of those skills instantly, but I doubt it. Especially since in the original game, Monica still couldn't resolve her own character flaws or establish traits. She couldn't prevent herself from wanting to pursue the player in a romantic interest because she was a character in a rom-com setting. So yeah. They do say that the side stories and the main game don't line up perfectly, but I still find that kind of cheapening, that it's not specified what is or isn't consistent between them in their own perception of the story. But from there, I need to voice my issue with this game's presentation of the simulation plotline. In this game, the side stories are a control group for testing this kind of shit. They're a way for researchers or whoever to study these characters in a controlled environment where the experiment isn't being run on them. If you know what a control group is in science, you should understand this. It's not clear if these people writing the emails are the ones who made these characters in the first place, or if they're just collecting them in a controlled universe and observing them from the outside. My issue with this is that they state that Monica is the one who made the original game after gaining self-awareness. Like, Monica is the one who wrote the character of the MC in the original, and as such, which means that in that control group, it's just the 4 girls in the club, there's no romantic plotline, and there's no guy character. This makes no sense to me. It's obvious that the original game was in fact a dating sim video game in its original form. Like, if Monica wanted to make a character that she could interact with, like a character for the user to control so that she could interact with something, and interact with the user by extension, that implied that she made the entire dating sim and every aspect of the dating sim if it didn't already exist before she created that. Like, she had to have made the poetry writing minigame, because that isn't in the control group. She had to have written the MC's dialogue. She had to have designed the plot. But we know that that's bullshit, because why in the fuck would Monica write a dating sim, create the entire dating sim, but not write herself into it so that she could date the MC? If she had control over that, why would she create the fundamental fucking the flaw, the blockage, the conflict in her character. Why? Why would her feelings be romantic in nature in the first place if all she wanted in the first place was to access the outside world, and she was never written to have romantic interest in anyone? No. It's very obvious that the characters had the personalities that they had because they were fulfilling tropes for the sake of a dating sim. It's very clear that everything in the game and the characters were originally made to be for a dating sim. Clearly. But then Monica started messing with it after it already existed. That's the only way it makes any sense. They were always originally made to interact with a male MC in a romantic fashion. So that's my biggest issue with this game. It seems to be implying things that are fucking dumb as rocks. Now, understanding that, yes, them being AIs made by this organization for some weird purpose not originally intended for a dating sim, that makes sense. That was always obvious. But the idea that Monica actually made the dating sim with mechanics that fucked herself over, that makes no sense at all. The side stories are like, take them or leave them. I think one or two of them are good. Sayori steals the show, and when she's not around, the writing gets a lot more bland. The characters aren't really faithful to the original 100%, especially Monica. So if you're someone like me, who liked Monica in the original game, well, go fuck yourself. And yeah, they're mostly just wavering between mildly boring and mildly engaging. I had to push myself to finish all of them, because it was pretty dull, which I'd never say about the original game. The original game was good from start to finish. The one thing I find narratively interesting is that in the side stories, in the control group for this virtual universe shit, there's a lot of lines and sentiment around the idea that the literature club is a good thing. That it's an entity that just brings joy and value to people. Oh, the literature club is so good. This is interesting because in the original game, the club itself was the antagonist. There's nothing inherently special about Monica. It's weird that everything puts so much focus on Monica when Monica isn't inherently any different than any of the other AIs. She just happens to be the one that they gave sentience to. Monica reaches the conclusion that the literature club itself is a joyless place that tortures the minds of those who enter it. And that's generally taken as the correct way to interpret the original. This control group with the positive literature club, it's interesting to me, as it speaks to what the creators of this control group may or may not want. I mean, they're still going to experiment on these characters by exposing them to the realization that their world is fake and giving them higher level computer access, so clearly they aren't doing this for the good of the characters. It obviously speaks to a kind of ignorance is bliss mindset, but I don't know. I'm also weirded out by the fact that the side stories have a narrator, a third party that voices the observations of the scenes that play out beyond just telling you the physical events that happened. It's very weird. But yeah, that's DDLC+. It's alright. Not a big improvement to the original, but it has some funny stuff, some cute stuff, I guess. It'll be more appealing to people who more readily consume saccharine content and some tricky stuff, and I obviously have not put that much effort into going through all the files. I'll wait for people who are more dedicated to do that kind of thing and then look up whatever their findings are. I'm sure I missed many things, and maybe some clarifications will alleviate some of my concerns, but yeah, that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at with that one. Ugh, my throat's gonna be fucking killing me by the end of this. Okay. Another recent thing that I've been playing, Guilty Gear Strive. I've been playing... I don't know what else to say on this one. How do you review fighting games? I play the game, I fight the peoples, I feel goods when I do the cool guy thing. That's my review of Guilty Gear Strive. I mean, I played May. What the fuck do you expect from me? The netcode saves this as a form of entertainment for me. I can play a fighting game, fight other players online, and have it be smooth the whole way through. I can play my friends online, and the game actually functions. I'd say that in terms of really shallow stuff like rankings or whatever, I wish some stuff was different, like the appraisal for your growth or experience as a new player. It's just one of those things that, I know that it doesn't matter, but because my brain is wired for completionism in gaming, I just find it odd that I got to, the top rank floor within 2 days of playing Strive on Steam. And yeah, I mean, it will, kick you out of heaven if you don't win enough, but still. I want a more linear kind of system to judge my progress as a player. I want another number that I can watch go up because my brain is hooked to certain chemicals. Also, fuck Soul. Let's see. Alright. I watched the first episode of To Your Eternity. I don't even know why I'm putting this on here, but yeah, it was the worst thing I've watched in a long time. Maybe episode 9 of Higewasoru was the worst thing I've watched in a long time. They're on a similar level, to be sure, for basically the same reason. They're like the definition of overdramatic. Of like acting like you give half a fuck about anything that's happening. Of thinking that writing is just shoving whiny, annoying characters on screen crying about some dumb bullshit while a very contrived plot plays out. And expecting you to, like, think it's emotional? Think it's heavy or profound? I couldn't wait for that little fucking pissant to die in To Your Eternity. I stopped watching it mid-episode so I could ask my friend who had already seen it if the kid died by the end of the episode, because I didn't want to keep watching the episode if I knew that he survived. He was so fucking annoying. Overdrama is a serious problem. You know, when a writer doesn't actually have an interesting story to tell, they'll just tell a really generic one and spend all their time trying to force emotional moments and force emotional scenes down your throat. Also, you should still watch Odd Taxi. Watch Odd Taxi. I think if I just mention it enough, some portion of my viewing audience will randomly recall my obnoxious voice ringing in their ears and pick it up on a whim if they happen to see it, browsing the fucking Crunchyroll or whatever. Watch Odd Taxi. Also play Being a Dick. Watch Being an Odd Dick Taxi. As for another quickie, Your Turn to Die is pretty fucking cool, I gotta say. Originally, I dropped it after an hour, because the beginning kind of sucks ass, especially for someone like me. The characters all come across as, like, flat and generic. The introductions feel like copy and pasted garbage. They all feel like gimmicky tropes. It doesn't engage you very well from the get-go, and it really does feel like a fan fiction. Like an amateur writer, which, to be very fair, it is. It very much is. But as it picks up, some of the wacky ideas start to get a bit more fun. I think a large amount of the gameplay sucks, though. Like, most of the puzzles are either fine or they suck. Whenever you're in a debate with the others, it can suffer from that kind of Ace Attorney thing that happens every now and again, where there's, like, the writers have this one idea of what they want you to be thinking, but logically and realistically, there's a fucking million different arguments you can make. But it just wants you to magically guess the one thing they actually want you to do for no reason. Like, you have to point something out, but the thing it wants you to point out doesn't really have anything to do with what's being discussed. Like, it literally wants you to employ logical fallacies in some of your character's arguments, which is pretty bad in some parts. And the logic of the writing is also pretty suspect at times. There's lots of moments where the characters aren't doing logical things, where the game seems to operate on some kind of false logic, like the game thinks that something makes sense when it really doesn't. For instance, just look at the main game, for example. You have the Keymaster, Commoner, Sacrifice, and Sage cards. Now, in a free and open debate, the Sage is given based on the rules. You know, the Sage cannot lie about who the Keymaster is. That's a rule. So if you just go around the circle and force everyone to say the words, "I am the Keymaster," you'll eventually find the one person who is not allowed to say that and won't say that, hence they are the Sage, and then you can use them to identify the Keymaster because they won't be able to lie about it. 2 roles determined instantly. There's no way to avoid that if you just force them to do that. All that's left is finding the sacrifice. Also, I just realized that the second main game has yet another plot hole that I didn't notice before, because the Sage was Kyutaro in the second main game, yet he was able to lie at one point and say that the Keymaster was himself, even though that's against the rules. There's a lot of logical errors of the design of puzzles, or just like the thought processes of the characters. Like, the characters, without using the methods I just described, they think that they've identified the Sage, but for some reason they seem to think that the Sage is this risky card that makes it more likely for people to vote for them and kill them, even though most people are commoners who are equally victimizable. Like, everyone but the Keymaster and the Sacrifice is open season to getting fucking murdered. So, And then, of course, there are blatant plot holes, like in the second main game, KG didn't start with the Keymaster, but instead it transferred from whoever had it first, who we don't even know who that is, transferred it to Sarah, even though that's probably not possible, because the person who originally had the Keymaster should have immediately pointed out that they started with that card. But whatever, no one ever says anything. We never learn who had it in the first place. Maybe they just weren't fucking paying attention, and they didn't even know that they had it to begin with. There's just a lot of parts where what the people are saying is just kind of wrong. Like, the game has something illogical in its writing. However, those are only the occasional annoyances, especially when it's an annoyance that's related to gameplay. Most of the time, the game is really gripping. Even if it has some of the plot elements that seem really contrived, you constantly feel like you're missing out on content, which is both cool and also not fun at the same time. However, the game has more choice than you might think, but less than you'd hope. It has greater overall path divergence than most games like this, but it's not a complete expansive web of potential pathways like in Zero Escape games. The choice aspects add a lot of pressure on and makes things, feel more exciting, even though, usually the game doesn't really change that drastically between what you are allowed to change. Most of what you see will still be the same. It's most similar to Zero Escape games, tonally and, content-wise, but without, the huge breadth of routes to take. It's got some puzzles, its tone is very Zero Escape-y a lot of the time, but with much less, weird, cringy shit. And usually each half of a chapter culminates in some big sequence, like an Ace Attorney case, or maybe like a Danganronpa trial, either a sub-game or a main game. And some of them are better than others. But what I have to hand to Your Turn to Die specifically is the trials in it, for one, justify their length. If one of them takes 4 hours long, if a main game takes 4 hours, it's because they actually talk about 4 hours worth of stuff, as opposed to, say, in a lot of other games, like, say, in V3. The V3 cases can get pretty long-winded relative to the complexity of the murder, at least. Because there's a lot of characters just, talking, making jokes, or doing whatever, and they spend a lot of time over-explaining relatively simple things. A lot of the time, near the end of a trial in Danganronpa or Ace Attorney, you're more so just swatting away these kind of flimsy excuses, when by that point it's very obvious who the killer is. But in Your Turn to Die, because of the topic of debate is usually something different every time, it can all keep escalating rather than winding down near the end. Now, of course, those are different games with wildly different purposes and appeals, but the point is that a lot of the trials in Your Turn to Die, for one, there's no comedy. They're dead serious. They all go towards a specified endpoint. They have set time limits that you approach near the end, and they just fucking escalate and get wilder and more convoluted, and more baller shit happens, and they just get really exciting by the end. They're really fucking hype. Beyond that, it's just very bold with its game structure a lot of the times, mostly in Chapter 2. It isn't afraid to flip the game design on its head and just introduce completely new, game mechanics or story elements and really run with them. And it also looks beautiful most of the time, especially this is the most beautiful RPG Maker game I've ever seen. The art style has a lot of great designs. Fucking Rio Ranger, his design is fucking awesome. This slender, feminine-looking guy dressed up with various articles of clothing from all the people who've already died in the game, in this weird mishmash. He looks sick. So yeah, the game is fun. It's got a lot of fun mysteries and ongoing little fuckeries, it's never complacent. There's always something for you to pick up on and be like, is that important? Is that something I should be paying attention to? Oh, there's more shit going on. You're never bored. I don't think that this is perfectly crafted web or anything, but I'm just saying it never bores you with the mystery-based ideas. It keeps planning in your head. It always keeps the weirdness fresh and exciting with new weird-ass elements to consider, even if some of the overarching ideas don't really make much sense. Now, I think Chapter 2 kicks ass, and Chapter 3 Part 1, or whatever it's called, that we currently have is the current, stopping point, is pretty weak. I think it's kind of boring. It just drags on. More importantly, it doesn't have the same cool qualities that the first the first 2 chapters had, you know, like interesting death game mechanics, like the tokens or the trading cards. But what it's really missing is intrigue. You know, it doesn't have a lot of ton of like, ooh, is this character up to no good? Ooh, what's going on? Oh, we'll eventually find out. We'll eventually unpack everything, and ooh, I don't know what's happening. Like the other chapters, you kind of know and understand who everyone is by this point in your group. And the time sink just feels a little dull. Like the dull characters in Chapter 3 feel really forced. It just feels kind of like a generic story about 2 groups coming together in a really cliched way. That being said, as lame as most of Chapter 3 Part 1 is, the actual sub-game with the banquet is still a blast. That's easily the best part, and I had a lot of fun with that. But no. My main concern with the game, especially given the fact that this is an amateur project, is that there's like a million things that have yet to be explained or justified in the plot, and I kind of doubt that it will answer all of those questions in a satisfying way. I think it'll definitely leave a lot more plot holes left unchecked, or contrivances. Like, for instance, there's a million examples, let's just pick one. Why was Kai's laptop in the game in the first place? Why is there a secret tunnel connecting floor 1 and floor 2 that the characters use to, I guess, somehow spy on Miley talking to someone else that we don't know who it is? If anything happens in this game that the participants aren't supposed to be able to do, then how the fuck did it happen in the first place? How is it possible to happen? Why does Ranger have a chip in his head that can be used to disable security? Why? I'm very suspicious of these seemingly minor contrivances, and I kind of doubt that they'll be explained in a satisfying way. Instead, I think a lot of the plot will be, and then a strangely convenient, unexpected, completely unjustified thing happened to let our characters do something they shouldn't have been able to do. That's my one real main concern moving forwards towards the end of the story. But yeah, fun-ass game, especially Chapter 2. I like that Ginabushi very much. He's high on my favorite characters of the year list, up there with Otokawa from Odd Taxi. And they'll probably be dismantled completely by, the majesty of Derek whenever the next episode of Being a Dick drops. Knowing Derek, that is. But whatever. I like Gin very much a lot so. Your Turn to Die's main approach to character likability is pretty straightforward. It just makes every character as reliable as possible, as capable as we can reasonably believe them to be. It's kind of like JoJo in that. I mean, JoJo has dumb characters too, but a lot of the times everyone just knows random facts and is very logically minded, In an environment with a lot of dangers and puzzle solving and such, it never runs out of ways for the characters to endear themselves to you just by being smart and or useful, but not to like a Mary Sue degree where it just solves all the problems without effort and there's no point to the conflicts. The one character I think this doesn't work very well for is the protagonist, Sarah. See, in gameplay, you can't actually testify yourself. You can't make arguments yourself. You just observe the arguments of the other characters and match them to each other, and you occasionally present evidence, although that's pretty rare. This works great for making all of the other characters matter and feel like they contribute and feel like they have a fucking brain, but there are a lot of times where Sarah just flat out should be the one to testify something, but she won't. Like, there's something she personally experienced that the other people didn't, but she still won't fucking just say the thing. She has to wait until someone else makes the argument and then use their statement to make whatever thing she's supposed to claim at the time. This, ironically, makes Sarah feels like she's the only one that doesn't have a brain. Even though she has to do basically everything, she never points out anything that another character didn't already figure out themselves. And I really don't like Sarah as a character very much due to this and more. I mean, she's also just kind of boring. It's pretty lame that the game has everything from actual children to full-grown adults, yet you still have to play as a fucking high schooler. And beyond that, her secret character twist thing that seems to be going on in the background that they'll eventually reveal doesn't seem to make much sense or be that interesting either, because it's kind of implying that Sarah is like this calculating, impossibly talented sociopath, but like she's not, unless there's some weird possession or alternate personality shit going on. She literally just isn't a master manipulator sociopath, but whatever. We'll see how much sense the story eventually makes. And the memes are great too, by the way. All of the memes.
Fucking bullshit. Fucking bullshit. Fucking bullshit. Holy shit. Fuck it. Fucking bullshit. Fucking bullshit. Goddamn bullshit. Son of a bitch. What the hell? Oh motherfucker. Goddamn bullshit. Holy shit.
Okay, I watched Luca. People have been shitting on this movie, and I kind of struggle to see why. There are countless animated movies with basic bitch, ham-fisted messages and contrived-ass plots. People are fucking dumb as rocks if they somehow think that other animated films are, like, deeper or more complex than this. Luca is pretty fun. The dude who voices Alberto is seriously, like, I'm fucking swooning. You know, his performance is one of the best I've heard in a long time, honestly. Every line he delivers sounds perfect. He could talk about anything, no matter how mundane. It would be music to your ears. His delivery is so good. So, really short movie. Basic story. It's a good time. I like the villain a lot. Some grimy douchebag loser who's already an adult, but he just hangs out around annoying people and competing in children's games and beating the children to try to act cool. But he's also weirdly, like, he's still a badass. He, like, rides his bike with just his feet like a surfboard at one point while throwing harpoons behind him. Like, this dude fucking rocks. The whole movie is just kind of like childlike whimsical. The motivations of the characters are purely childlike. They just want a thing that they saw that they thought looked cool. They talk about freedom sometimes, but it's not like this big thematic thing about freedom. It's just more of a passing interest, like a child would have. Nothing in the plot is really about freedom. The kids don't have some deep philosophical desire for anything. They just get obsessed with small, little, cool things that they think are fun. And that's the whole movie, you know? Like, there's obviously like this dumbass Spartacus scene near the end where it's like, oh, we ended racism, cool. Really, if there's anything I have an issue with, it's kind of the grounding for some of these ideas. I don't really get Alberto's point of view, because in the beginning he was completely on his own, and he didn't really seem to care that much. He wasn't, like, that outgoing, or, well, I mean, in the sense that he wasn't, like, that attached to the first person he met. He felt like a cool guy, but also, like, kind of a prick, kind of an asshole the whole movie, which I like. I like him a lot. But then he has this weird attachment to Luca and bitterness towards others, even though he didn't really even seem to care that much when meeting Luca and first hanging out with Luca. He just seemed like a force of charisma that just told Luca what to do sometimes and had dangerous fun without thinking about the consequences. It just seemed like, you know, that kind of energetic jackass, you know? I just find it weird that he'd have this personality whilst living for so long by himself, but whatever. Some people have said that Alberto just suddenly turns into an asshole when he, you know, causes a conflict in the third act, which I think is insane. He's a prick from the first scene we meet him in. Hell, he's a prick before we know anything about him. When he's stealing random things from humans, you know? He perfectly sells the character of a troublemaker, kind of bad influence, who has his own issues, of course, which drives him to his problematic personality traits. And yeah, he doesn't do anything particularly evil, per se, but he's just kind of an asshole, you know? Luca just goes along with it because he's a wet blanket loser that's prone to bad influences like Alberto. Like, yeah, they are friends. They're not particularly, I wouldn't call them toxic to each other, and they both enjoy each other's company, but come on. Alberto always had these personality traits. Anytime anything goes slightly awry or he sees something he slightly dislikes, he acts like a huge douchebag about it. It was very clear he was a douchebag from the start. That's why I like him. The movie is fine. It's pretty fun. Alberto's cadence and demeanor is probably the best thing in the movie. That feels the most unique. Like, something you really haven't seen in other kids' animated movies. At least for a while. But yeah, good movie, worth the watch. It's really short, so you can just blaze through it. It's entertaining the whole way through. There's no boring parts, other than the dumbass accepting the fish people thing at the end. And it's not really, like, even going around being a pretentious, acting like some deep, impactful thing. It's just a fun movie with a good vibe that's focused on, like, examining childlike fantasy. and the whims of kids, ironically, which gives it a more introspective value than other films that try to slap you in the face with some really simplistic, brain-dead-ass message. Luca has a lot of little unique aspects that just make it cool, you know? It doesn't have that much trite garbage because it has a lot of unconventional ideas. Even if the plot isn't very broad and has a very small scope with its smaller stakes. It's got an amputee characters that aren't made into dumb dramatic backstory scenes. It's got functional, separated, divorced couples that, again, aren't exploited for some cheap, simplistic, emotional drama. A lot of its more interesting elements are kind of background fodder that aren't ruined by some shiny, big, stupid spotlight on them. And Alberto's toxic relationship with his father, for instance, we don't see some oversimplified, over-dramatized scene of Alberto's dad being a deadbeat and leaving his kid. We just understand that his dad left and was probably some kind of dirtbag, you know? Luca is a movie that actually has more to it the more you think about it. And it has nothing that yanks you away from the fun and screams at you some boring-ass, samey themes. Again, except for that god-awful fish scene near the end. And really, the whole ending is pretty cliche and lame, save for the incredibly nuanced and reserved performance from the actor that plays Alberto. But yeah, movie is not bad. Alrighty, next big one, The Mitchells vs. the Machines. This movie kicks ass. This is probably the best thing on this list. I like the fundamental contrast between the 3D animation and the papery 2D that often overlays it. This was one of the most pleasant movies to look at that I've seen in quite a long time, based on my taste, but everyone else that I've heard from seems to agree, the movie is beautiful. As for the plot, here's some of my big issues with it. This was the experience where I really felt like saccharine writing was actively fucking over the artistry and making things way, way worse than they should have been. Mitchells vs. Machines was a really funny comedy, although just out of personal preference and out of this movie's really long, especially when you look at how simple the plot is. It's kind of impossible to explain why it's as long as it is, and I wish some of the jokes just cut a few seconds shorter. A lot of the jokes will be done, and then the shot kind of lingers on them for that kind of comedic effect, but I think making some of the joke timings a bit snappier would have helped with the punchlines and helped them land better at a singular moment. But for me, I was smiling for most of the time watching, but I didn't actually have a lot of laughs. I didn't laugh very much. It's not something something awesome like Being a Dick, where I get multiple full-on belly giggles, fucking chuckling like a crazy person every couple minutes, you know? It sounds weird to describe comedy in this way, but I think that some of you should know what I mean. There are times where I found something funny, but it didn't cut itself off in a snappy way, and I was just I didn't laugh, you know? I enjoyed it, but whatever. As for the narrative, well, I think it starts really strong, and then it succumbs to the horror known as saccharine writing. It establishes this very genuine feeling family conflict that honestly doesn't seem as drastic as the story made it out to be. It's really not that extreme. Kid doesn't get along with her parents very well. They don't have any shared interests. She's an outcast with no friends growing up who shared her interests and became kind of a loner who never got much support. And they just don't have, personalities that mesh very well and have sort of brewing hostility towards each other most of the time. Okay. That's pretty down to earth. That feels pretty real. That's not bad enough that it seems like Katie would just leave the family and never come back again. When I was this age, I had a worse relationship with my parents than Katie does, but, once you spend some time away, especially if you're still relying on their money to go to college or whatever, conflict resolution is not very hard. Resolving little arguments comes easier than the delusion that a conflict will last forever. And it's weird that this movie acknowledges that Katie has some elements of naive teenage mindset that make her think of things as being more long-term or more dramatic than they actually are. But the movie still treats the idea of her leaving forever as a genuine concern when it realistically isn't. They just don't get along that well. It's not like they're on the verge of a family collapse. But regardless, the movie starts really strong with this nuanced and complicated, real human drama, but then I guess because it's a kids' family movie, rather than making the development of this drama and conflict equally nuanced and interesting to match the nuance of how it was established. The resolution is just that the two characters just have a bunch of saccharine-ass scenes where they connect and just get along. Like, oh, I guess all they had to do was just, like, try. Like, literally just try to get along at all. And suddenly they get along perfectly and enjoy each other's company and have fun and like each other. It's the most, like, power of love fucking shit that I've seen in a while. You know, the solution to their difficult family situation is just, oh, they just started getting along. No real problem. Most of the movie, they don't even have their established character flaws or traits that make them butt heads in the first place, or established animosity and tendency to get into fights or be in a bad mood around one another. For most of the film, they're just flawless good guys who have no personality defects at all, who actively go out of their way to try and mend their relationship and be supportive, you know. This is framed as like, oh, they're growing closer to each other, but really, they just drop their conflict like it was the easiest shit in the world. I mentioned this really deep into my 7-hour review of Last of Us Part 2, but this is kind of what I was talking about when I said that I prefer interesting answers to boring questions, rather than boring answers to interesting questions. This conflict resolution is not even remotely satisfying compared to the actual well-done, complex intrigue of the conflict establishment. The question being posited here is 10,000 fucking times more interesting than the answer. As such, the answer that they give can't even serve to be a meaningful conclusion to that question. Like, just power of love isn't going to magically make people get along when they have nothing in common and they tend to fight all the time. It's irresponsible to establish a relatively heavy subject matter with your conflict when your resolution is going to be so juvenile. Imagine if this story, imagine a different situation. Imagine if this story was about a suicidal kid, and the resolution was just a bunch of scenes where he just tries to be happy and not depressed anymore, and just suddenly he's happy and he doesn't want to fucking kill himself anymore. You have to understand the nuance of the story you've already written before you go around slapping together the development of that story. In other complaints, the plot of Mitchell's is so, it's really loose, you know, that it enters kind of an awkward gray zone. The plot is so stupid and illogical that it seems like it's meant to be a parody, like it's meant to be pure parody, where all of the events of the plot are just jokes, not meant to be taken seriously, but then sometimes they talk explicitly about the plot and the plan and stuff that dictates to what they do in ways that you actually have to pay attention to in terms of exposition, and there are, more serious moments that are only really serious because of the plot. For instance, Katie and Rick get into not even a fight. They don't even have a fight, but Rick is sad for a moment because he saw Katie do something or whatever. But even though they really have no reason at this point for that to put a dent in their relationship, since they literally don't even have those flaws anymore because they just magically solved all their relationship problems in 2 seconds, like I talked about. But Rick is captured and can't talk with Katie after this, and he's just moping around. The plot can't decide if it's just a huge joke or if it actually kind of wants to be a plot with stakes that actually influences things. You have no investment in taking the missions that they go on seriously because the whole plot is a joke. I don't know, it's just a little tonally dissonant in some places, if you know what I mean. But all in all, despite this, Mitchell's vs. the Machines was great. I liked it a lot. I think it's way too long and could have been shorter and trimmed some of the fat and a lot of the scenes and just made some stuff snappier, especially the saccharine dramatic moments or the attempts at being somber. It's just a little editing and reworking away from being perfect. But as it stands, having scenes that aren't snappy enough and drag on a little too long in some places can actually be a huge problem for how entertaining the watch is. For example, I rewatch Parasite a lot because it's one of my favorite movies now. I don't know how many times now at this point because the movie is just so snappy. It's so... It gets so much done in so little time, and it is so jam-packed with goody fucking... What's the thing Munchie said? Okay, post-editing phosphorescence here, but fuck me, one of my favorite YouTube videos of all time has been erased from the internet. I was going to get a line from it that I liked, that I am not remembering now to use here, but it's gone. The video's gone. Truly, this is a tragic day. I'd trade any one of these fucking movies or games that I have on this list to get that video back, but whatever. Yeah, the movie should be swifter with its pacing so that it's actually a non-stop drama and comedy thrill ride, instead of being kind of dull at points. Even having little moments of dullness is a big fucking problem. You know, a small dull period can cause a wave of boredom to crash over the viewer all at once, I've found in my experience. If they feel bored in a moment, they might just stop watching right there, especially if it's a rewatch. This becomes more and more likely on rewatch. Hey, you know, want to find out what the worst scene in your favorite movie is? Keep watching the movie over and over until there's a part of the movie where you feel like skipping forwards. That's the boring scene. That's the one that doesn't hold your interest or have the same good pacing as the rest of the film. But yeah, movie's really good, but it's frustrating to think about because it easily could have been like totally fucking phenomenal. I love the protagonist, especially Katie. She's really great. Okay, really quick, let me just get in Better Call Saul in here. I've only watched seasons 1 and 2, which is like nothing, I know. So, any of my praise or criticism won't be with the full context of the series, but right now, I've seen enough to say with confidence that I don't really want to watch that much more of it. See, Breaking Bad has similar issues, or a similar issue, but it's less pronounced, where it's like, as a Western TV show that won 1 million fucking awards and got a bunch of money and shit, it was kind of swayed by consumer demand. Like, I'm sure most people have heard the story, or most people that are fans of the series have heard the story of how originally Jesse was going to die at the end of Season 1 of Breaking Bad. They had writing cuts. They cut Season 1 early. They learned that people loved the dynamic between Walter and Jesse. And then they rewrote the entire show to keep Jesse alive, you know? Sometimes a show being highly receptive to its audience and what its audience wants is a good thing, and sometimes it's not so much. See, because most audiences don't have good taste. Audiences are not good writers. Writers are writers. The largest percentage of an audience is just an average consumer, and especially for something that runs for a long time, what does the average long-time consumer of something want? Well, more. Just more. That's why we get weird plot lines that keep shoving Jesse back into the story when it doesn't really feel like he should even be relevant to the plot anymore, and that's why it kind of drags on with the more content and the more subplots for them to just deal with, because they just want more TV show. Well, I want a good show. I don't want more show. I already have so much shit to consume that I haven't gotten around to yet. I could do with a short good thing more so than a long okay thing. Breaking Bad is obvious what the plot is going to be right from the start, the overarching plot. It's obvious in the first couple episodes that the show is Walter is going to get more dangerous and unhinged, and that he says everything is for the sake of his loved ones, but he has strained relationships with them. He judges everyone around him. He has a large ego, spites his place in the world for not being as great as he believes he should have it, and that his violent and criminal acts are manifestations of that ego. You know, if he really wanted what was best for his family, for example, you can immediately see this in like fucking episode 4. He should have taken the offer to go work at his old college friend's business, but his ego and macho man conservative delusional mentality prevents him from doing that. Literally, the whole point of the show is incredibly clear right away. It's clear that Hank is a good guy hero who's very sensitive to the people around him, but he acts in a crude manner as part of the culture that he's been forced to adopt in his career and his life. You know, everything is fucking clear from the start if you just have a fucking half a brain, you look at the screen. But it just keeps dragging shit out with side plot lines that start and then eventually wrap up. Because the show is so popular, it has to meet the demand to keep extending it and making more. And with Better Call Saul, it's that times 1,000,000. It's following Jimmy and that other fan favorite character Mike, right? Now, for a clear fan service show, most spin-offs that are made that are just built around the popular characters from something else are entirely fan servicey and shitty. And this show is not entirely fan servicey and shitty. So I have to commend them that even when pursuing bad ideas, the content is still fairly good. Like, if they weren't as good with basic writing, creative presentation, clever little ideas for each episode, clever scene direction and all that stuff, clever cinematography, if they weren't as good as they are, the needless more that they kept adding to Breaking Bad would have been as low quality as other shows that we've seen that suffer from the fucking fan service hammer of just constantly being extended. That being said, Mike has maybe like 1 or 2 episodes in Better Call Saul that I've seen that weren't remotely engaging, and the rest have been so fucking boring. They all feel pointless, like side quest stories. There's nothing interesting about them, and I really wanted to start skipping past every scene with Mike by the time that I got to the end of season 2. See, I am immune to fan service. That shit does not work on me. I want to actually watch something good. And my problem with Better Call Saul as a series is it feels like the same skills went into making the show, so it feels really well done, it feels really high quality the whole way through, but it also just feels kind of boring and pointless when you stop to consider it, because the show doesn't seem like it was made with a strong concept in mind like Breaking Bad was. Literally, the plot of Better Call Saul so far is, Jimmy could very easily solve all of the problems in his life and just, live a normal, healthy life or whatever, or just be satisfied like any other fucking human being, but he just has some magic fucking criminal gene that makes him sabotage himself, and not in a BoJack Horseman kind of self-sabotage way. The plot is literally just, Jimmy is naturally inclined to be a criminal. God personally reached down and mandated that he should be a criminal. So when everything is perfectly fine, and there's no stress or there's no real large struggle forcing him to take action, he just still does a criminal thing to make a conflict happen that didn't need to be there. In Breaking Bad, there's a part in particular where Walter can easily walk away from the criminal life. I forget what season this was in. 2 or 3 or something, but he goes back to it simply because he enjoys it. See, now we have an understanding that he feels more alive when doing these dangerous criminal things. These were already established character traits of his, and it's in conflict with his desire to do what's best for his family. We know that really early on. We know that the conflict is because of Walter's believable personality traits, his toxic sense of masculinity and desire to feel strong and powerful, which he doesn't get from his regular mundane life. It's the most natural thing in the world for him to continue to be a criminal when he doesn't need to anymore for the money, because the basis of his character is that he just wants to, right? Or he has reason to want to. With Jimmy, we see that he's more than capable of living an honest life without any issues many times. But when things are going too well in the plot, oh no, screenwriters, do your thing. The concept is so fucking stupid. I was very resistant to even accepting that this was actually what they want you to believe. Walter White is a believable character with actual human concerns. Jimmy McGill has a magic dumbass screenwriting condition where the writers that run his universe just shove their hands up his ass like a fucking sock puppet and make him do insanely dumb shit just to force the plot to keep having conflicts so we can keep following this character and we can keep making a show that we can make money off of. This not only poisons Jimmy's characterization because it's just so fucking dumb and contrived, it also poisons, say, the conflict with Chuck. When Chuck first started saying all that shit about how Jimmy is just born to be a slimy criminal and how he can't change despite him living honestly for years, he lived in the mailroom for years working an honest job with no issues. Busting his ass, putting himself through law school in addition, all of which he did without this bullshit fucking retarded criminal itch getting the better of him and making him lash out and do toxic or self-destructive things. I thought the point was that Chuck was just fucking retarded, right? Because everything that he was saying sounds retarded. But no, the dumbass universe shifts around to force Chuck's idiotic point of view to be validated by making Jimmy do the bad things he had literally no reason to do. 'Cause just criminal instincts, bruh. This tries to force Chuck into a moral gray area that shouldn't even exist in the first place. It's so obvious that the ham-fisted point they're trying to make with this brotherly conflict is something like, self-fulfilling prophecy. Because Chuck treated him like a criminal and never gave him a chance, he became a criminal. But it's just so contrived and stupid in the way that it's done. More than anything, this is an example of the message of the show being this, sloppy piece of shit that doesn't really make sense in context because the dumbass message of the show was never the point of this show or the point of these characters to begin with. The point of the show is, fans of Breaking Bad like Saul and Mike, so we'll force a story to play out with those characters and we'll just try to pull out some themes out of our ass, try to mold them over these characters, try to make something work here. fan service first. Maybe we'll slap together some dumbass themes that don't really make any fucking sense in the process. So eventually, I recognized that the whole show would basically just be this shit over and over and over again, and I decided that I had better things to do with my time, because these episodes are really long. You know, one of those ones that I didn't like hate or anything. I didn't hate the show. It was occasionally really fun to watch, but the fact that the series was flawed at a conceptual level, and the frustration with the completely contrived bullshit conflicts being extended or created just for the sake of having more conflicts got really annoying. You know, especially when you stop to realize that every single thing in the show and why it's happening, you can trace it back to something stupid in the writing. You know, watching the show in the moment is actually good television for the most part. There wasn't an episode I finished where I was like, oh, that was bad. You know, it insulted my intelligence. It sucked to watch. No, I mean, it's well made, well shot, well acted. It's just high quality. It's a high quality bad idea. You know, it doesn't have grounding. It doesn't have a through line that works. The plot and themes would be whatever popped into the heads of the writers during the screenwriting phase. They'd shove these characters into never-ending conflicts either way, regardless of whatever they came up with them to do. Sure, some of the ideas that pop into their heads to justify the show's existence are better than others, but the fact remains that they're still just half-assed justifications. They're scrambling to justify this show that has no good reason to exist. All that quality and style and clever shots and good dialogue and scene pacing, all this polish around nothing. It's a finely polished excuse, you know, and almost everything I've seen with Mike has been boring as fuck. The episodes are just so damn long. Every scene is long. The shots are long. Every scene of a character just doing some mundane thing, like, you know, some knowing expression on a character's face. Every goddamn shot is just so long. Sometimes the border between tasteful and just wasting my fucking time is a little hard to see. And I get bored really easily, if you couldn't tell. And one really boring episode is enough for me to kind of check out and have no motivation to keep watching the show. I've finished shows that I think are worse to watch than this show. But yeah, I really have no desire to see much more of this show. I mean, people treat both of these shows with this insane reverence. But they aren't fucking Shakespeare, okay? All the clever ideas and little symbolic moments or whatever are all completely isolated. They're just little knickknacks, just one clever thought here, some nifty idea here. Oh, this episode starts with someone's death and ends with the birth of a child. Oh, what a fucking clever, fascinating idea. It's so deep, right? Nothing in either series is so foundationally deep or well-crafted that every single element in the series and in the episodes in the show is vital and serves every other element, you know, and so many people confuse fan service and, like, hype with actual artistry. That's why you get so many people that unironically think that, say, Ozymandias is the height of television, just because it has payoffs and oh shit moments that activate people's lizard brains, even though so much of what people like about that episode is because of the work done by previous episodes, not anything specifically great about the writing of that episode. It's just the episode where events happen to, you know, climax. To get an idea of what I mean, just watch something that's with a really tight presentation, where the whole episode is paced perfectly, and it's riveting from start to finish, where it just builds up and it flows with its own ideas while still making use of what has already been established. Something so good in every aspect that flows so perfectly that you forget that you're alive until the episode finally ends and you see the credits. I'm not going to make some dumbass broad statement about what is the best episode of all television. I don't fucking care, but just to go watch some solid ones off the top of my head and recent times that I've been into, go watch, like, say, Free Churro from BoJack Horseman, or episode 4 of Odd Taxi is a recent show. That episode's really fucking tight. It's really tight. It just flows perfectly. It's just like a fucking ride. It's an experience, man. And it's not like an experience in like an action-y, anything like that. It's just like the actual moment-to-moment writing is so well composed, you know? And it's so well structured. Those both have what these shows miss: a complete structure where everything was perfectly crafted and all the fat was trimmed out to make the optimal, ideal, episodic experience. Hell, I even think that, like, the Rick Lantis mix-up is a better single episode of television than any episode from Breaking Bad or what I've seen from Better Call Saul. I want to rewatch those episodes because I want to rewatch those episodes, you know? Go out of my way, watch them again, because every second of them feels great to watch. Sure, I'll look up my favorite scenes from something like Breaking Bad on YouTube or some shit, but I don't want to go back and watch any given entire episode again and again. Most people just, you know, like the quote-unquote satisfying parts of a story, so the big payoffs after a lot of build-up. I, on the other hand, like good writing, so I get equal satisfaction out of good build-up or good payoff. I don't really care which one I consume. I usually prefer good build-up, since it's inherently more subtle than most payoff moments. Oh well. Oh, I also just wanted to say, Better Call Saul does have one of my favorite OPs of any show that I've ever seen, with the abrupt music cut at the end. Oh, so good. Okay, update, hype check. In the midst of writing this and being incredibly lazy about my work output, randomly, Shay Frilla's dropped a video doing the same shit I'm doing called Better Call Saul is Overrated or something like that. Now, I thought this was relevant for a few reasons. Mainly, the reception he's gotten in his comments section. Granted, I don't really agree with all the things Shay Frilla said in his video. He doesn't have a very similar mentality that I have to consuming media, and my problems with this show are very different than his problems with it. Other than our shared, you know, intense boredom towards Mike's and Mike's scenes, and our shared just, like, not being as impressed with the series as the fans are. But on that point, this is something that can't really be avoided. You know, like, I've read the comments from these people who think that they know something that I don't. That, like, they think that they've identified some little hidden gem in the writing that I haven't. I've read descriptions and watched videos on what I should find interesting about the story and characters, and yeah, everything that I've ever seen that anyone has said or pointed out were things that I already was aware of and already understood. Like, I pay attention when I consume media. I do, okay? I know that, say, Mike went after the guy he was trying to kill at the end of Season 2 because that innocent dude got killed and the shit that Mike was previously involved with, you know, guilt or whatever. It's not like I miss that. I just think that it's stupid and boring and I'm not interested in watching it. See, everyone has a threshold for what they consider to be, I guess, natural developments to a story. And by definition, anything that is not natural is contrived. I am a pretty sensitive person to contrivances. Some I recognize but choose to overlook, and some bother me more when they encroach on fundamental values. Let's look at Mike in Season 2, specifically him going after Hector, when for all intents and purposes, he could have just not done that and just stayed home, and his story would literally be over. It would literally end right there. You know? Now, some things to keep in mind that impact what I consider to be natural developments in a story versus contrived storytelling. I know that this is a prequel. Therefore, I know that this is a story that is trying to get characters from point A to point B. That can be taken for granted very easily. Since you expect the characters to get where they were in Breaking Bad, sometimes you don't really question the logic of how they got there. You just accept it, like, oh yeah, he goes into the criminal underworld. But really, was that a natural development of the story that I'm watching right now, or was the character just forced to go in this direction in the story because the script needs him to go in this direction? So the fact that they're writing the characters to a established endpoint is the first thing that makes me doubt the authenticity of any given plot development, automatically, even if it is something that is natural. You know, the next thing is screen time and fan service. I know that they want to make more episodes of this show, and I know that they want to keep these popular characters in and these actors in it and all that. So I know that they want to write the show in ways and in directions where they can stay on screen and have more shit to be actively doing, which is another bias that they have that drives how they write those characters. Both of these are pretty major factors that impact the writing. Do I really think Michael Ehrmantraut would do all this shit and go out of his way to seek revenge on Hector for this one innocent guy that got killed, or even before that, just because Hector was like an asshole to his family, and that he would really go out of his way to put his family in danger again, one, by making more enemies, and whatever, okay? Even if Mike was partially involved in said guy's death, you know? Like the innocent guy that got killed. Or is this just all awfully convenient to the story that Mike would push this conflict when he really doesn't need to at all? He doesn't have any grand objective or anything that really forces him to take any sort of action like this. He has many reasons not to do this shit. Also, going after Hector could lead to more family for Mike's family that he's trying to protect, and that's supposedly why he's offended by this and wants to go after Hector in the first place, because his family was threatened. Hector will just be replaced by another evil asshole anyways, even if he's killed or put in prison, probably. Does Mike even strike me as the kind of person who has, like, no other outlet for this kind of anger or this kind of sense of justice or whatever? I mean, what do I know about him? He's a kind of dirty ex-cop that didn't have strong morals. He's very weirdly the most capable person who's ever lived for some reason, even though he's just like he's just an ex-cop, you know? And then there's the half-measure experience that he tells Walter about in Breaking Bad, some other shit that he references, his son's death, his disappointment in him as an authority figure, his own disillusionment with the law enforcement after that personal experience and personally experiencing so much police corruption. That's what we know about the character, okay? I just don't buy it. I just don't think this Mike decided to continue to be a part of this plot when he could have easily just had a fucking happily ever after and, like, if you're feeling bad, just get therapy or something, man. Like, this is because Mike has no foundation to him as a character, unlike, say, Walter White. I don't know what is most important to Mike, so I can't buy into any decisions that he makes. You know, they can just tell me whatever the fuck they make him decide to do, and I just have to accept it. I know that his son was important to Mike, but it seems like he wants to do right by his remaining family and his granddaughter. He has some sense of justice, but not enough to not be morally flexible. You know, I don't have a moment here where I think, oh yes, I see, this is the very natural development of the story, naturally based on his established, you know, beliefs and morals and, you know, worldviews and whatever. This is totally natural and the natural decision for him to make. No, they could have just as easily and just as believably written and said, fuck it, Mike decided to ignore Hector and deal with his guilt/anger or irritation in another way, and he just took care of his family after that and didn't interact with the criminal world after that. You know, I would have just as much reason to accept that as the decision that his character made. It would be more logical, in my opinion, for him to do that. I think it's all one giant, stupid contrivance. It's not because I missed something in the plot that these idiots think is so subtle that only the most enlightened viewers could ever possibly pick up on. I just don't buy it. And even if I did buy it, I'd still think it was fucking boring. It's really goddamn boring. You know, I know that's not like a formal criticism. Anyone can call anything boring, but it's kind of the most important factor. There's just nothing I find even remotely compelling about any of Mike's scenes. His character is uninteresting to me. The things that he's doing are uninteresting to me. The conflicts bore me. The scenes drag on and on. In writing this, because I'm a fucking good boy who second guesses himself all the time and thinks, you know, oh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should correct myself. You know, I watched a couple more episodes into Season 3. Episode 1 of Season 3 has like 25 fucking minutes of Mike looking for a tracking device in his car. He finds it, looks into how it works, drains the battery to, I guess, make it seem like it drained naturally, but you'd think that they'd notice if the battery died way sooner than they would expect it to, but whatever, maybe they have no idea what they're doing. Anyways, like, nothing that he does in this episode couldn't have been crunched down to probably 2 or 3 minutes of total screen time. Am I really compelled to watch him go step by step in researching this tracking device, in taking apart this car? Why would that compel me? Am I supposed to just have an appreciation for the hard work that goes into each step of what Mike does? But, like, the plot will still have him magically do whatever it wants at any time. Like, you can't have a character that pretends to be realistic in that he will wait in a location for hours and hours and hours just watching someone to do a job, but you also expect me to believe that he's a ninja who can appear appear anywhere he's needed anytime, like he did in, say, Breaking Bad to ward off Walt away from Gus when Walt went to Gus's house. He's just this overpowered character like any other that the show will just sometimes pretend to be this grounded individual, down to earth, when they feel like forcing you to watch him do some incredibly mundane ass shit. You know, like, we don't praise David Cage for doing that. Why should we praise Gilligan? So yeah, 25 minutes total in this episode. None of it was interesting at all. I had to remind myself that I was a living, breathing human being at one point. Like I said, the problem is the line between tastefulness and boredom, or rather, pretension. Now, I don't think this show is pretentious, but I do think pretension has a lot to do with how some portions of the fan base advocate for it. Like, most fans would probably tell me something like, oh, the slow scenes and the subtle movements and the facial expressions are all necessary, and it has to be that slow, and it has to give you this much greater depth to the meaning and characterization, maybe the tone, but, like, you can have artsy, stylish scenes without also just wasting my fucking time. This also comes down to the matter of pretension, so we'll have an example. I'm gonna draw a comic right now. So in this comic, here's a guy. You know, look, he's having a great time. He's loving life. Oh shit, dude got hit by a fucking car, man. Like, he died. Like, you see how he's fucking dead here? Isn't that awful? It sucks being dead. Okay, now, what would you say if I told you that this comic is incredibly well written? Because it speaks so much on the nature of life and death. It speaks to Hume's theory of moral positivity, and it has existential undertones that make you question the value of your life. If I said that was all somehow derived from this fucking comic, just because it has a dude that died, would you buy that? Or do you have at least half a brain? See, now, this is the matter of pretension. Sure, I could have written a story that elicits those themes and those ideas, that's obviously possible, that actually has something to say about Hume's theory of moral positivity or existentialism, but I didn't. I just drew a guy that died, and you can make up any interpretation you want. You know, there won't be any evidence for those interpretations. It's all going to be hearsay. It's all bullshit, you know? So when there's a scene of some mundane action, or some really fucking long shot of a character's face, or just a character, like, doing paperwork at a desk, or whatever, you know, one of three things can happen. It can actually communicate something that can actually be used as evidence to validate an interpretation of the themes and characterization. 2, it can just be a stylish, nuanced scene for just the sake of setting the tone and just being kind of charmingly human. Or it can do none of those things, and it can just waste my time. Or some combination of the three. Just so you know, you can express subtle information, but still do it quickly. It's all a matter of intake. You know, how much can a person reasonably be expected to catch while watching something? I love content where the information, subtle or explicit, is thrown at you fast. I love soaking up information in any form. This show is slow when it's trying to convey something subtle, quote-unquote, but in that sense, it's still drip-feeding you the information very slowly. Like, this minute, the characters will explicitly tell you this information, and then we get this scene of a fuck-all-nothing happening, and a character's expression, that action and actions that drip-feed you that information, you know? Why can't the explicit information and the subtle information be delivered faster, or, like, at the same time? You know, I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, I fucking get it. I see what's happening. You know, like, I get what you're trying to show me. Can we fucking move on, please? To more information, please? If you can't use evidence to explain how the plot and themes and characters and message are more fascinating and deep than I think they are, then you can't pretend like there's some incredibly deep masterpiece hiding in all the subtlety that I'm somehow ignoring. And I don't hate mundanity, you know? I find a lot of these needlessly drawn-out scenes charming, too. I do think that they're charming a lot of the time. But it's pretty easy to slip into just being boring when you aren't presenting real content. As for the quote-unquote subtle character moments and facial expressions, and these fucking idiots wouldn't know subtlety if they saw it. This shit is not subtle. Everything in the show, everything that the show wants you to pick up on is pretty goddamn obvious and in your face. But whatever. I've seen people jizz their pants at the fact that Jimmy's like coffee thing doesn't fit into his car's cup holder, because apparently that's the first time they've ever seen basic symbolism. It really is mainly pretension, you know? Some people think this is the most ingenious shit of all time, that it's the only show to ever do anything that it does with its presentation or its characterization or its ideas, and I'm just someone who happens to know that that's objectively not true. And hell, I don't even think the show is bad. Like I said, I think it's actually pretty reasonable to think that it's one of the best shows on TV, at least currently. I can easily see how someone would think that for legitimate reasons. But a lot of these people can't fathom the fact that someone gets the entire show and is still relatively uninterested in it. And they seemingly haven't experienced the countless other pieces of media throughout all of history that are much deeper and more layered than this show is. These characters are not the deepest and most nuanced characters ever written, guys, okay? I think there's a little bit of people overhyping Better Call Saul's writing, but mainly I think these people just aren't familiar with other stories that already exist that are equally or more nuanced. Because, yeah, fans really fucking try to drive home the point that this show has the most, like, dense characters to ever exist, man. They're so fucking dense. They have more going on than real living human beings, dude. You know, you don't even fucking know how dense they are. And that's just generally their justification for claiming the series to be the greatest authority in existence, higher than Jesus Christ, Gordon Ramsay, and Gold Lewis Dickinson combined. So, yeah, once you clear up that delusion, mainly my own personal issues with the series are as a viewing experience. It's just not in my nature or in my taste to watch long-ass scenes with very little being accomplished or very little being actually expressed over a given period of time. Like I said, subtle or explicit, you can deliver information to the viewers much, much faster than this. Subtle doesn't need to be slow and tedious and time-consuming. So yeah, personal taste, and I'm not like, you know, I could watch the rest of Better Call Saul if I wanted to. It's not painfully boring to me like a lot of other stuff is. It's just a big time sink, and I don't enjoy the show that much, and sometimes it slips into being pretty boring for me. I also just think it's just really fucking overrated, you know? And on a fundamental level, at least with my value system regarding art, I think it's clear that Breaking Bad is at least better than this show. Because Breaking Bad is a character study about a well-defined character that was conceived from the ground up, and then taking his logical, natural destination of the character, and all the decisions and progressions of the plot are natural. You know, like, let's think about the plot of Breaking Bad. Like, okay, he needs money, makes meth, you know, whatever. I mean, he turns down the job because of his established toxic masculinity that defines his entire personality and all of his beliefs, like his refusal to accept charity, all the things like that. They all tie into this sort of like macho man aesthetic and kind of personality he's trying to present himself as, whatever. But like the actual plot events, you know, they need to make more money, so they kill Crazy 8, they need to make more money, so they start dealing with Tuco, then Tuco causes problems, they have to kill him, then they're like, okay, why don't we distribute, and then they run into issues with that, and then they solve those issues, you know, natural issues that you would expect to result from that, and then they're like, okay, well, we need more money, we need to expand, and so they expand naturally, you know, the natural progression of the objectives of the characters. And by expanding, they go into the natural problems of that, where Combo gets shot, and then they're like, okay, shit, also Badger gets picked up by the cops, and they have to, so also another more or less natural development that's going to happen. It's going to be a problem they run into by doing this shit to solve their established problems. Everything stems naturally from the original fucking conflict, and just goes forward. Everything they do is totally natural. They don't just make up new shit, you know? And then, until they get to Gus, and then Gus is kind of, like, dragged out for a long time, I guess because Gus is really popular, but whatever. Then, let's talk about, like, Better Call Saul, you know, where so many of the actual plot derangements or anything, because the problem is there's no foundation to it. Like, there's no long-term goal or objective to it other than just the writing has to get the characters to where they are at Breaking Bad. So it's like, oh, all of a sudden now Jimmy in season 1, like episode 8 or 9 or whatever, Jimmy discovers this Sandpiper Crossing case out of the blue. This miracle fucking case just lands in his lap out of nowhere. It's just, okay, now this is a new element in the plot. Or, he's going back to Marco. Oh, Marco died, I guess. Marco's almost never brought up again, so I feel very baffled at his inclusion, but whatever. Oh, he doesn't want to do the job because he's just being a mopey, whiny asshole, and he repeats that a million fucking times in the show, and it gets really old. Oh, he doesn't like his new job. Okay, he's doing a job. He doesn't like his new job. Starts doing this. Okay, also, the bank, Mesa Verde, comes out again out of the blue. It just like enters into the plot all of a sudden. It just like becomes it's not a natural development of what the characters are already going for. It just appears and then all of a sudden is like a major plot element. Like all these things just sort of bubble up in contrived ways, like just more weird random shit happens rather than everything progressing in a natural way from a clear start point, just flowing like a nice river. But whatever. So yeah, Better Call Saul is a character study where all the characters are being retrofitted to have character arcs that aren't the natural result of being intricately crafted with this specific combination of values and experiences and personality traits like Walter was, but instead for the sake of fan service and making more TV show to sell and serving as to bookend a how did we get there prequel story. I also agree with Shafe specifically on the point of feeling like the beginning of season cuts to Jimmy's life after Breaking Bad also feel kind of disingenuous. If we're supposed to be viewing this show as a tragedy, which it seems like it's going for, since, what? Saul was killing it in Breaking Bad. He was doing fucking great. I'm not gonna feel bad for him in this show. He was having the time of his life in Breaking Bad. He wasn't, too evil. He was just kind of a dirtbag. And it wasn't any of the faults this show wants to instill in Jimmy that caused him to lose in Breaking Bad, that puts him in that place after Breaking Bad that we see him in, at the Cinnabon and whatever. It was actually his good qualities. Saul had a strong loyalty to his clients in Breaking Bad, even when you thought he was selling them out while getting threatened with actual death by Mike, for example, Mike and Gus. It was all a ruse. He was still on Walter and Jesse's side, sticking with his clients. His loyalty and not cutting Walter out when he had the chance, he easily had the chance, was his downfall in Breaking Bad. I don't watch this show and think, oh, this is the path of a tragic man, and we're seeing him slowly but surely reach the point that he ends up at all this. No, motherfucker. For one, he doesn't have some of these flaws in Breaking Bad, so those definitely weren't the cause of his eventual downfall. The events of Breaking Bad can't be considered the natural developments from this story either, even though this story is already very unnatural in its progression. It's not the fault of anything that we're seeing happen here that things go bad for him in the other TV show. And thirdly, I never saw Saul Goodman as a tragic character to begin with in Breaking Bad. He's legitimately happy and satisfied in that show. Why would I retroactively see that as a bad thing? Better Call Saul, right? I watched season 3 and 4 in the time it took me to write this video script. By the way, couldn't be bothered to find where season 5 was since it's not on Netflix. And everything I said about the show is still true. And it is truly lost within its own asshole. It was sniffing its own farts so much that the show slipped. The head of the show just slipped inside the ass crack and was never seen again. Like a Keijo super or something. Every scene, I'm like, yeah, I get what you're trying to say about this character in a vacuum, but you could have taken this in literally any direction. I'm watching a scene of Kim being like, oh, I feel guilty about that last thing we did. And I'm just so exhausted by this, because this scene could have been at literally any part of the plot so far. And it's so fucking repetitive, because they have no long-term plan for any of this shit. It's so obvious. This show could have literally ended after season 1. Watch the last episode of season 1. It could have easily been the stopping point. After that, it's just, oh, this little mini-arc. Oh, character feels bad about this, so we can shove that character on screen for a few more episodes, I guess. Oh, we need some more footage. How about, this conflict comes back, or this conflict comes out of the blue. You really see the repetitive nature of this writing style. If I could count the number of times where, character isn't going to do a thing, gets a not so subtle talk about some unrelated thing that ham-fistedly relates to their own experience and contrivedly makes them feel bad or something, and then they do the thing, Happens over and over. oh, this bad thing happened. Now we get this scene where they not so subtly feel bad about it in some way, like, but it's not like any of these things add up to anything. It's not like any of these are painting the rich tapestry that is a single coherent vision for this series of these characters. It's just like, oh, we're doing another thing of this predictable character arc. This character's in a fucking mood now. They're all moody. They're going through their fucking edgy phase. They all blur together. Because they might as well be the same fucking story over and over and over again. That's what I mean about this show being lost in itself, lost in its pretension. I changed my mind. I actually think that this show is pretentious to some degree, because I can't think of any other reason that the show would feel that the writers think that their writing is so goddamn profound to keep presenting what feels like the same shit in the same comically dramatic way. Like, any scene that plays out, it could have played out a million different ways. And people would just accept it, If the show was written completely differently, all the fans, all the drooling fucking fanboys would still just accept whatever they wrote and say that it's just as natural, How can you say something is perfected or a flawless masterpiece when it could have been wildly different, but you still would have probably blindly accepted and praised it regardless of what they actually wrote the path of the plot to be, It's like they really think that just because they come up with some half-baked character moment, like someone in the writing room said, oh, it'd be really realistic and deep and, like, amazing if he, like, got really stressed out and did something destructive. And we can throw in a scene of it being linked to some figure from his past and add some basic bitch dramatic irony to it. As if any of that is masterpiece worthy, And they don't even bother to check if they already did this before. They just don't put in long-term plans for nuanced, intricate characters. They just decide, okay, this is what we're doing for a couple episodes, I guess. Like, because they just make these kinds of scenes, and they think that their story is automatically a masterwork, like a flawless examination into the human condition. And let's take an example. I mentioned a Rick and Morty episode. That show couldn't be more different from this, so let's use that as an example. I really don't care that Rick and Morty don't have a really well-defined plan for their story arcs. The show is entertaining mainly on an episodic basis. They do small little adventures. And some small things are building in the backgrounds, but we learn more about the characters as it goes, but, like, we're learning more about the characters that are already well-defined, that we understand very clearly, and not characters that are just made up on the fly to have random, realistic, quote-unquote, character moments shoved in with no clear vision for what the character is supposed to be or represent. The conflicts in the show aren't the result of the characters going out of their way to make more conflicts in Rick and Morty. The conflicts are generally external, so that's not an issue in the first place. A show like Better Call Saul expects me to continue to be invested in the long-term path of a character that very obviously doesn't have a clear vision. That's the only thing that it has going for it. It doesn't have a funny, weird adventures to watch. It has characters. That's what it has, and who they are and how they're doing mentally speaking. So when most of the show is made up of just mindlessly shoving in this mental hang-up or that personality defect to cause this conflict or whatever, and have so many scenes overlap and feel like you've already seen this part a dozen times before, because you probably have, it just gets on my fucking nerves, man. It's really annoying. The characters mostly have mundane problems that normal people would have, but they still decide to go about solving them in ridiculous ways. Unlike, say, Walter, who had extreme goals that required extreme measures. And it also established the world building a lot in Breaking Bad to explain the stress that he was under to make those hard choices, like the poor economy, for instance. Like, what's the conflict? Jimmy needs to pay this month's rent? Okay. Normal people also need to pay this month's rent, all across the country, all across the world. Look, most of them do so without breaking the law. Why does Jimmy have to break the law to complete this simple, mundane task? Well, I don't fucking know. He just does it. Oh, Jimmy wants to impress his girlfriend and be all, independent or whatever. Okay, a lot of people want to do that and deepen their relationship or maybe go into bracket. They don't do this insane shit. Jimmy randomly decides to do a completely unnecessary criminal act in affecting the Mesa Verde case files that literally causes the conflict that defines the rest of that season and the entire next 2 seasons. Why? What was the conflict that was so vital that he needed to take this action? And oh, look, Kim makes plenty of money on her current client and could easily hire paralegals to supplement her work, especially since the client should be able to pay for themselves, you know? But now she's overworking herself to the point where she crashes her car. Why? Well, she wants to make more money, she wants to pay for Jimmy's side of the office now that he's out of work, and also she wants to stick it to Howard or whatever and be independent or whatever. Okay. Pretty relatively normal motivations that a normal person would have. Is there any reason in that a relatively normal person should make impossibly stupid life choices and like overwork themselves to the point of getting in a nearly fatal car accident? These tasks aren't that extreme, and there's no reason to take this extreme of an attitude towards almost any of them. But regardless, the characters all still just choose the dumbest possible choice they can in every situation, just so that they can force another conflict to happen in the show to keep it running. When there are a million other much more sane, reasonable, natural progressions, organic progressions of the plot that a sane, reasonable human being would do in these circumstances. A million fucking people on this earth wake up every day and have toxic family relationships and people that don't support them. They have ego problems. They have bills to pay. They're getting tired and losing passion in their career direction. They're a little bored of what they do day to day. Their romantic interests they want to pursue. They have recently deceased loved ones. These are all, or they're just, kind of bored of any of it. All of these kinds of things. Millions of people around the world every day. And you know what? Almost all of these people on this planet navigate these concerns and issues without making bafflingly stupid and self-destructive life choices every couple of fucking hours. I will not accept any of these things as justifications for why the characters make the choices they make in this show. They don't have to do anything special, and if the reason that they make insanely extreme life choices in relatively mundane situations, physical or emotional situations, if the reason is some sort of underlying mental health concerns, like Jimmy and everyone else are just locked into toxic patterns of behavior due to addictions or depression or whatever else, then the mental health of the characters should be the primary focus and not a half-assed excuse for what the show is presenting you, if that. We get the smallest, most half-assed bullshit, nothing-burg excuses for why the characters don't make more infinitely rational choices. And then we just bum rush into the next big dramatic moment that happens as a result of the incredibly horrible fucking retarded-ass choices everyone makes. Unlike a show like, say, BoJack, where the entire thing is about mental health and self-destructive patterns and really fucking diving deep into why bad choices are made and the actual underlying mental health concerns and existential crises the characters have that push them to harp on the more surface-level conflicts that they encounter in their daily lives, this show just makes any excuse it can to have the characters just make problems. Most of the conflicts are not as dramatic as the show tries to make them seem. The characters are just fucking morons. They're completely inhuman. They deal with emotional strife in insane ways. Over and over. The situations that unfold are not even close to inevitable, quote-unquote, under the circumstances. No, they're not fated, they're contrived. You know what the perfect finale to Better Call Saul would be? Jimmy throws a gender reveal party that destroys half of New Mexico and also kills Kim in the process. I'm assuming that Kim isn't already dead. I haven't watched season 5, but I don't think I saw that in the episode descriptions. But anyways, I mean, doesn't it make perfect sense? Yeah, you have this totally normal situation, like, say, a pregnancy or whatever, totally normal, totally mundane, happens all the time, and, it's something that most normal people deal with while causing no completely unnecessary problems and destroying the world. But then Jimmy feels compelled by the goblin screenwriters in his brain to ruin everything for everyone for no reason. And that's what gender reveal parties are for, right? People that just need to cause problems instead of being remotely normal. That sounds like the perfect finale for the show. And then we come to another serious problem. Mental health. This show has absolutely no respect for mental health. It's not anywhere near as bad as something like 13 Reasons Why, obviously. I only got really offended in this show at one thing, which was around season 4, episode 1, I think, where we, the audience, are supposed to blame Jimmy for Chuck's suicide because Jimmy fucked with Chuck's malpractice insurance. And there's this really ham-fisted scene where Howard walks in and he basically like turns to face to the camera, like talking slowly so even the stupid people can understand. And he says, "Did you know that Chuck killed himself because of the insurance?" Nothing else, just so we're clear. Turns to look at the audience again. "Chuck killed himself because of the insurance." Nudge, nudge. Now, I'm not a professional psychologist, but I know a lot more about writing than 99% of people, and I know what mental health professionals have advised when writing mental health into a serious storyline. And I also have, basic fucking common sense, which helps in a lot of these situations. Now let's get one thing clear. A suicide is a mistake by the person who commits it. It is not an inevitability that just needs to be caused by some sort of trauma or external force. A suicide is a choice by a person who is choosing to do the dumbest possible thing a human being can do. To portray suicide as anything but that in a story that pretends to be tactful with its handling of mental health in its characters is nothing but disingenuous and irresponsible. 13 Reasons Why did this the whole show too, something very similar, where basically the show ends up being pro-suicide because, like, the person who killed themselves was in the right. They're portrayed to be that they were in the right the entire time. They're just a victim. The real cause of the problem was just those bad people who did those bad things to the victim, and like, it treats the suicide person as like the moral authority of the show. It acts like killing yourself is perfectly justifiable and basically encourages people and tells them that, like, if you want to make someone feel guilty about something they've done, if you want to prove that someone hurt you, that it's a perfectly viable option of forcing them to be guilty, or of quote-unquote forcing you to kill yourself. So yeah, that's one of the first major red flags that professionals advise you against when writing a story. You're not supposed to show the act of suicide. For one, you should avoid reading a suicide letter if one was written by the character. Don't show people reacting to finding the dead body. Just don't, like, make it a big fucking pity party where the person who died gets all this, like, emotional attention and validation afterwards and, like, prove something to the other characters. How about we just don't do that shit? How about we have a little bit of common sense here? Chuck tried to end Jimmy's career within the confines of the law, and then Jimmy tried to ruin Chuck's career, again, through completely legal means. There is nothing illegal about Jimmy telling the truth to the insurance company that Chuck is mentally ill. But the show, because it wants to be dramatic, it tries to turn this into a whole, like, oh, who should we blame for this suicide type of thing. The show doesn't respect Chuck's agency as a character. Instead, anything he does wrong is often hand-waved away as, oh, he's mentally ill, so he has an excuse for, being a total fucking asshole. Everyone around him refused to get Chuck the professional help he should have gotten. Chuck himself can and should be judged for not seeking out help for his own mental illness if it was affecting his decision-making. Even if his illness was what made him a piece of shit, he is in the wrong for not seeking to better himself and fix the problem, instead just hanging around and causing more pain. It never treated Chuck's mental well-being as anything other than a dramatic plot point that can be shifted around, or, oh, now his schizophrenia and his sensory hallucinations are worse now. Ooh, it shifts and turns based on how much he likes or dislikes Jimmy. Ooh, magical TV disease. And the same is true for everyone else. If I'm supposed to believe that Jimmy and everyone else in the show makes all their terrible fucking choices over and over because of some underlying mental health thing, and that's why they can't just make normal choices like a normal person, then it's irresponsible for treating that mental illness like the underlying source of conflict that it is, or not doing that. The show isn't about Jimmy getting help for his weird fucking addiction to crime that the show insists that he has, or any of this other insanely compulsive behaviors that make him do stupid, unnatural shit all the time. It's just the excuse that the show uses to make the conflicts happen on screen. Otherwise, I'm just watching characters that act completely inhuman. In fact, Chuck says that Jimmy isn't capable of change, like he was just born this way. He was just born to be a criminal, and we as the audience are supposed to hear that, or maybe like he had very formative years in his early years, and whatever, he's just stuck this way. He's fated to be this way. And we're supposed to hear that and think, he might be onto something. He might be a little right. Maybe Jimmy can't change. He'll just keep scamming and hurting people. I mean, that is what happens in Breaking Bad, and the fact that that is, like, on the table as an interpretation just shows how little this show gives a fuck about accurately and tastefully tackling mental health. I think Taylor Williams had something very similar to say about 13 Reasons Why. And this goes for a lot of the characterization in this show. What people seem to believe is the strong point of the show. You say this show is an intricate character study and has a lot of rich characterization. I disagree. I say the show simply uses affectations of mental health and internal human strife in order to make you think that the show is this brilliant look into humanity and the human mind, but really, they could just do whatever the fuck they wanted with these characters, and the audience probably won't be able to tell the difference. The audience probably wouldn't be able to tell what was... Like I said earlier, if the show was drastically different, most of the fan base probably would still support it in the same way and still say that it's, like, genius. You can't prove that these characters are actually intricate and well-developed, and not just a mishmash of whatever they felt like plopping into the character bio. Like, ooh, and now we have this thing where Kim gets unmotivated to work. Oh, that's a human thing, right? That's, like, a natural thing people experience. So let's, like, make, like, that a thing for, like, a couple episodes. Let's shove that into the plot. And then you know... more back and forth of her becoming... And, like, Kim just gets more and more boring as the show goes on because Kim just becomes the other characters. Like just another kind of hypocrite backsliding for more or less the same reasons. I mean, hers is more related to, like, additional pressures that are put on her in the workplace. It seems like people don't give her the... whatever. I mean, it's basically the same fucking character, and then she's backsliding between Giselle and whatever, and it's just so fucking boring and repetitive. The character isn't established well enough for the character to really have a clear path of anything, so no one can say that it's not in character for them to do whatever they put on screen, you know? Because the character's not well defined, they could write anything, and I can't actually prove that it's out of character because there is no character, you know? It's probably too extreme of a way of putting it, but, I mean, it's not that impressive. Like, this show is just, like, when you look at it in the bigger picture, it's just people being miserable all the time. Breaking Bad was more or less the same way. I mean, that's why I had a fondness for Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad. Not necessarily because it was maybe the interpretation intended by the show. I think Saul was meant to be more comic relief, and he wasn't meant to really be that symbolic of much, but Saul really was the only person in Breaking Bad who actually had a satisfying existence. He had fun, he was happy, he was satisfied, he was living his best life, no joke. Everyone else is just angry and sad and wearing their fucking dumb frowny faces all the time. Personally, I took this to mean that Saul had his head on right. Like, Walter and everyone else makes all these decisions that he says that he needs to, or for his own satisfaction, but it never seems like he's happy. Never seems like he's enjoying life. Everything always going to shit all the time. There doesn't seem to be a point in doing all of these things if the end result is just him and everyone else being miserable. Saul knew it was important. He did his little criminal acts here and there. He got the money that he wanted. He got what he wanted and enjoyed himself. He relaxed. He had fun. He did whatever he felt like. He didn't push himself to some bullshit agenda. He just chose what made him happy, and that's what made me respect him as a character. But the show doesn't even have a character like that. Everyone is miserable all the time. None of them really have any reason to be. Nothing is stopping most of these characters from just doing something that makes them happy or adjusting their goals or their outlook on life to just have a fucking basic healthy lifestyle. But they all force themselves into these frowny face situations for all of time. You know, I can't admire anyone's choices at any point because they all suck and they're all making themselves miserable. Oh, so miserable, you know, only frowny faces for you. In the bigger picture, that's what I get out of this show, message-wise. That's what connects with me, is that everyone here sucks and they're all fucking morons. And they're so annoying. Every character is so annoying. The only one I like is Howard now. Like, you know how when you're watching a really shitty drama and, like, there's some sort of simple, mundane misunderstanding, like, oh, a character walks in at the worst possible time and sees or overhears something that hurts the relationship or they get the wrong impression, whatever. Or just, like, some contrived-ass soap opera scenario like that. You know what I'm talking about. That's what watching this show feels like a lot of the time. Like, you see a character, you see the writing on the wall, the show is not subtle at all, it's incredibly obvious. You see that a character is about to do something really fucking stupid and just make problems, and you're just rolling your eyes thinking, oh, come the fuck on? Like, could we not just force this stupid embarrassment for 2 goddamn seconds? I think the only character, like I said, that I didn't hate by the end of season 4 was Howard. Not because they're all, like, unethical people or anything, but they're so fucking annoying, you know? Hell, I even started to actually kind of remember that Mike's scenes exist by the end of season 4. And I think season 4 is more or less just, like, dog shit. I think season 4 is the worst one I've seen, but it's not like that Mike's plotline became less boring or that I started to give more of a fuck about it. I didn't. But at the very least, watching Mike, I wasn't watching these annoying assholes just make dumbass soap opera scenes, and it was refreshing to watch, like, cute bromance scenes between Gus and Mike, because the rest of the show has almost nothing cute in it. It's just miserable, retarded, annoying assholes making problems for no good reason, or the half-assed, half-baked excuse of characters just being mentally incapable of making rational choices. And then we watch the problems unfold for a couple hours, despite the problems themselves not usually being interesting at all. You know, like, we could have spent that time actually focusing on why they make the problems and really, like, developing that rather than just going back to the same shit. You know, like, BoJack, again, as a series, is, like, an incredibly complex character repeating cycles of behavior. BoJack repeats cycles for years and years, and, like, the first 3 seasons, more or less, with the exception of, like, Escape from LA, for example, is kind of just the repeated cycles of his toxic lifestyle through all of the influences that affect why he is unhappy day to day and why he goes through these patterns of behavior and goes through these ups and downs, these hills and valleys, and gets excited for the next thing but inevitably ends up disappointed in it and goes back to substance abuse and sabotages himself in scenarios, and he's guarded in these ways, you know, all this shit. But it's like every fucking season, every fucking episode, we're learning more about it. We're learning more aspects. For example, in season 2 of BoJack, you know, one of the major things that affects, like, a character can be growing and developing their comprehension even if they're making a mistake and arguably getting worse. For example, Escape from LA is one of the, at that point in the show, the worst thing that we've seen BoJack do. You know, it's one of the things that really makes us question whether or not we can support the character, obviously. And yet, you know, it does also represent, in some way, a necessary step to self-improvement, because it's the first time where he really breaks his cycle and really, like, stops and recognizes and admits to himself that it can't go on like this, you know, that he has to actually take a leap of faith, that he actually has to take a risk to improve his life, that and you know, he takes a leap of faith. It's a bad way. He's being an asshole. He's doing toxic things, but it was, like, you know, one element that needed to be overcome before he can start all these processes, all these roadblocks that are in the way of him accomplishing real change. And the entire show is predicated on that concept of whether or not he can achieve real change, which is not what Better Call Saul is at all. You know, there is no, like, potential optimism or anything. There's no potential point, because nothing is framed around, like, how can we get this character to the point of actual change. It's just the same excuse for the character to force uninteresting conflicts to the show over and over. And this show is just flat out for people who are easily impressed. Like, some basic piece of symbolism, basic character motivation, some basic piece of subtext, and they treat it like it's the most genius thing ever written. That's the only thing that truly, truly bugs me. And it's not even fair for me to say that, but I'll explain why in a second. You know, it's funny, like, I will have a normal viewing experience, totally normal, and I will, like, in my head, in my brain, my itch will make it worse for myself, worse than it needs to be. Take this scene, for example. Now, when I first saw this, I instantly looked around the screen, like I normally do, to check for details, check for clues, look at the camera work or whatever, look at the color gradient and how everything is framed. I mean, that's the basic MO of any new shot. And obviously saw the very not subtle at all tape rolling. Oh, by the way, quick clarification, but the word subtle means, you know, like, not obvious. If something is apparent at a glance, literally the blink of an eye, and I can see what they're going for, that's not subtle. Like, by definition, that's the opposite of subtle. Subtle is something that requires work to uncover. Subtle is not actually immediately apparent content. Hearing people call this show subtle and shit like this subtle is fucking hilarious. This show is about as subtle as a brick hitting you in the face. But whatever. So I saw this super subtle scene of Jimmy rolling the tape like Chuck showed him how in the earlier scene, or I forget if that was even a different episode, but I think it was the same episode. I forget. And my first thought was like, yeah, okay, I got it. I mean, that's fine, you know. But then I ruined the scene for myself. I made my own viewing experience worse because my next instinctive thought in my brain that was creating this image of some guy writing in a fucking forum or in like a YouTube comment section about how this shot of Jimmy rolling the tape is so smart and that it's like next level genius and the greatest thing to ever be put on TV. Like, how could a writer or director be so galaxy brained as to make this shot? And it's like, I pictured that in my head. Like, I envisioned this fantasy scenario of the exact asshole that would think and say those stupid things about how overpraised this one simple case of symbolic subtext would probably be. And then I just got really fucking angry watching the scene, even though the scene did nothing wrong, strictly. It didn't offend me, but I was thinking of a scenario where a dumbass fan would overpraise it, and then I got angry for no reason. But then, funny thing about that, of course, is that a couple days later, still working on this video script, decided to do some more research, check the opinions of some more people I haven't heard from, see how normal people react to this show. And when I watched a reaction video to this episode and looked to the comments section, sure enough, literally the first fucking comment, I'll put it on the screen right now, the first comment I saw was talking about this exact scene. The way I knew that they would, the way the fantasy played out in my head, the way I was certain that they would. I know these fuckers better than they know themselves. I've seen this so many times. Basically, a lot of the show is like that, you know? Some basic piece of subtext, or some obvious-ass, not very interesting thematic connection is drawn between two things, so on, so forth, and people just shit themselves about how amazed they are, like how much of a masterpiece the show is. Like, this is literally their first time seeing that kind of shit. And that's the problem. See, I can't blame them, because it very well might actually be that person's first time seeing this kind of storytelling technique used in this way. They might not be used to it like I am, you know? It might be the first time he or she has noticed it. They've probably watched or read something that has some dense symbolism or subtext. They just never noticed it before, I would say. But it's the most likely scenario. But not to me. I've been studying literature and film for years and years, more than half my life. This is nothing new to me. A basic technique, a way to express elements of a story. It's nothing special to me. I really don't care. But let's think about it like a kid, like a child watching Frozen 2. Let's say some child says Frozen 2 is the bestest movie ever made. Nothing is better. Well, in that kid's eyes, he's right. It might be the most impressive thing he's seen based on his taste and how developed they are and what he's seen before, you know? What he's learned about writing and how to extract more from a story than what's immediately obvious. You know, he doesn't know shit about subtext. He doesn't know about wordplay. He doesn't know about cinematography. He doesn't look at the bigger picture. I mean, he still would have an inclination of the, like, if he watched a piece of shit, he would not be having fun, but he doesn't understand those concepts necessarily. Now, he doesn't understand or look at the bigger picture of how a narrative is fundamentally structured or how the elements feed off of and into each other. He doesn't look at how the pacing and order of events can be played with. He just knows what he's learned, what he's seen before, what he understands, and what he's comfortable with. The same goes for people who think this is the best thing ever written. To them, it might actually be. They very well might not have ever encountered a more dense, more sophisticated, and layered story as far as they are aware. They might not know how to appreciate elements of a story they've already considered, like stellar dialogue, humanizing nuance, carefully structuring tone. Like, any motherfucker can make a metaphor and slap it on screen. You understand that, right? Like, it's really not that hard. Have you ever tried it? Just take a simple story, look at it from a bird's eye view, a non-linear capacity, whatever, and just say, can I add some symbols in here? Can I express this, but through a visual metaphor or something? Can I make some sort of repeating thing, a motif, if you will? Well, then you just do exactly that. You can just do that. And then to make your communication work, you just make it kind of obvious so that people actually understand that you are trying to make inherent symbolism. Anyone can do that. A lot of them do, actually. It's just, people don't... Most writers and TV directors don't pause for 5 minutes with the ham-fisted metaphor being literally the only thing on screen, so the slow-ass audience has no choice but to notice it. It's just a thing that you're impressed with by at first, but in time, you become jaded to it and learn to appreciate more than what you previously realized was possible. So, nothing I say will convince a normie that this show isn't the best thing ever written, or that a lot of what they praise is hardly even that rare or impressive in the first place if they just get better acquainted with existing phenomenal media out there. But hey, I do also like the memes for this show.
Beat and whir and hurt. And this time it'll be too much. And you will die there, alone.
So that's Better Call Saul. Hey, maybe it gets better. Maybe season 5 is really good. Shafe said it was overrated, but that word is kind of meaningless. Because I can't make that statement myself. Like, it's like saying boring, like I talked about earlier. You know what you want to express, and it is accurate to say, but it doesn't really communicate anything. I mean, anything can be overrated. Overrated refers to a lived experience more than it does an actual piece of media, and it's like an adjective to apply to it. If you say that Better Call Saul is not overrated, well then I'm sure I can find a guy who overrates it. Nothing is overrated or underrated, really. It's just a matter of one's peer group and the popular buzz around something. I tend to see a lot of people that overrate it, so I consider it to be overrated. That doesn't mean that it is overall overrated. And again, it's not bad. I enjoyed my watch of it, but the whiplash of realizing that the scene that I'm watching is identical to dozens of other scenes I've already watched from this show, and the internal conflict that I'm supposed to buy into feels like the same fucking internal conflict I watched a week ago, it just aggravates me. Maybe it gets better. Maybe eventually they actually have some sort of idea for what they want to do with these characters so the story can flow naturally instead of being a disjointed mishmash of dumb bullshit loosely tied around forcing the characters to make decisions to push them closer to the Saul Goodman of Breaking Bad, or at least the Saul Goodman of this show. That being said, yeah. Saul in Breaking Bad did not have a lot of the personality traits that Jimmy has in this show, so it's hard for me to even consider them to be the same character. It's more like a retcon for a character, since there's genuinely no way that this Jimmy could physically become the Saul Goodman of Breaking Bad in like a year or two. They're completely different people with different personalities. They have different expertise. They have different experiences and attitudes beyond what could be explained away with people changing over a small amount of time. In fact, let's talk about that real quick. Personally, I don't care that much. I think it's fine for a prequel series to retcon a character and tell a different story, so I don't really mind that Jimmy is not remotely like Saul Goodman, but whatever, It gets a little dicey when we also have a flash forwards of Jimmy's life post-Breaking Bad with the new moniker Gene, so I guess I'll call him by that now. Now, in Breaking Bad, Saul has a lot of dialogue that explicitly states that he's been an expert at being a criminal lawyer for years and years. We have no reason to doubt him because he is so reliable and confident in that show. He knows what the fuck he's doing all the time. He also has many connections that are incredibly valuable to the point of being, like, overly convenient because he always just happens to know a guy that knows a guy that can solve any weird problem they have. But whatever. And we can only assume that we only see a tiny portion of the total connections that Saul has access to. I mean, Saul may not even necessarily, like, this is probably not his only big gig that he's doing. He's probably working for other high-end criminals as well. Maybe not as high-end, but whatever. And also, Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad, he is not a master manipulator. He does lie from time to time, but he's not particularly good at selling things. For instance, he is a charismatic guy and he's an energetic guy, but he's not talented at selling things. For instance, there's a scene that comes to mind where Saul is trying to convince Walter not to do something to Ted after Skyler cheated on him. And Saul, being Saul in that show, he is a crass, crude person with very limited social awareness, and as such, Saul accidentally offends Walter with a joke about Skyler cheating on him, and then Walter gets angry and storms out. This was clearly not the outcome that Saul wanted in this conversation. It's not like he said something to try to offend him, to obtain some sort of objective or manipulate Walter. He is just a crude person that said something that pissed off Walter because he just doesn't know better. So Saul Goodman does not have tact. Jimmy in this show has tact. He's not a crude person. He knows how to behave in situations. He knows how to be polite. He knows how to not offend people, okay? This is not something that he'd just somehow forget how to do in 2 years. Like, he'd forget how to fucking behave and not piss people off. It's not like you can just accidentally fucking forget that maybe making jokes about their spouses cheating on them and incredibly masculine, serious individuals might piss them off. Saul just literally doesn't know how to read the room in Breaking Bad, and his personality is very abrasive and offensive. That is who he was. That is, he's a womanizer. He repeatedly makes sexually inappropriate comments and actions to Francesca in the show, and a million other personality traits that he clearly does not have in Better Call Saul. These are not aspects to one personality that you can just, like, acquire over 2 years. It's very clear that Jimmy McGill and Saul Goodman are not the same person. And hey, maybe eventually they stop jerking themselves off by thinking that they can just have any internal conflict in any order at any time and call their work a fucking masterpiece. And I've heard the interviews. These writers are constantly surrounded by people that will call them geniuses all the fucking time. It is pure pretension. God. Last point, swear to God. But while watching a bunch of videos of people talking about Better Call Saul and getting people's opinions on it and explanations of what they find good or not good about it, just due to my due diligence like I normally do, and, I try to make sure that I understand where everyone else is coming from before I confirming my own opinions and confirming that I know better than they do. But I saw this snippet from an interview with Vince. I'll put it on screen now. This, I know this isn't like a completely damning thing or anything. It's just like a single bad judgment call that he's talking about, and it is something that he's admitting to, and it's not even necessarily clear whether or not how honest he's being in this, because it's hearsay, but it's not like I have any reason to think that Gilligan is bad at his job, but at the very least, to tear down the mythos behind Gilligan as this genius, flawless writer. Just look at these words from him. He was considering a contrived ass, dumb as fuck, shoehorned character tie-in with Marie goddamn Schrader as the technician that would happen to be operating on the brother of Saul Goodman in his own TV show, purely for the sake of some cheap, shitty, worthless, shallow fan service. So, I shouldn't have to explain why this would have been absolutely horrible writing. A grade schooler could spell it out for you if need be. But I want to draw your attention to the part where Gilligan says that he thought this would be a very organic part of the story. I find this incredibly amusing because, yeah, as I suspected, the main difference between myself and everyone else, from the videos that I've watched, at least of other people that like the show, main difference between myself and the people that like the show isn't a matter of understanding what they're trying to do with the characters or understanding the symbol or anything like that. No, I didn't miss anything. Literally not one thing as far as anyone has pointed out to me. Nope. Like I thought, it comes down to belief. These people think that the show feels organic. They think that it feels natural, that nothing is contrived in the slightest, and I find the story to be extremely contrived. I think that Jimmy's inherent criminal instinct and inherent toxicity is absolutely fucking retarded. Even that's funny, because a lot of the people I heard from said that the fact that the audience knows that Jimmy becomes Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad is a part of the reason why they can find the plot progression naturally, but, like, that's explicitly the opposite. I told you, that's the opposite for me on this point. And I know that I'm 100% correct on this one. When you have some sort of spin-off or prequel, when a new plot has to get characters to a specific place by the end, that is the moment where you should start looking for contrivances. When you should suspect that the plot is taking shortcuts to get to the established endpoint, and maybe the steps they take along the way aren't super logical. It's like having an idea for the message of the story, but rather than writing a story that would express that message, you write a story based on that message. So say if I wanted to write a story about the power of love, and I wanted to do it in a way that was natural and organic, I don't know, I'd write a story like Water 7 Saga in One Piece, where, like, a conflict occurs, and, Luffy must muster determination, stand after his fight with Lucci was over, maybe get on the Going Merry, using the established rules of the universe, how ships have their own soul and some degree of autonomy, and the ship comes to save them, whatever, I don't really care. I write a story that's more or less expresses what I wanted it to do, not a realistic story, but a believable story, one you can buy into. Instead, what if I had a story where it's gritty and realistic and there's no magic whatsoever, but then someone gets shot and dies, and at the funeral his wife, cries on his grave, and the magic of love and the tears brings him back to life. Now that would be a situation where the story didn't actually express the message. Instead, the message of love is all power, was taken as a given already. And unnaturally, an unnatural, ridiculous story played out that required us to already accept the message at face value and take it seriously. In this show, rather than make a story that makes me actually believe in the idea that Jimmy might have some inherent criminal itch, or naturally suggest the idea that Jimmy is, one way or another, is destined to hurt people, or destined to become this Saul Goodman character, instead, we have to just accept those stupid ideas as a fact in order to even take the plot seriously in the first place. We have to accept that he's just, regardless of whatever a normal human being would be able to do, that he's just going to do something illegal and toxic because it's his destiny, or it's his nature. We have to already accept the message in order to watch the story that's supposed to be expressing the message. That's dumb. That's a fallacy. Things like, oh, this character is just fated to be this way, or, oh, this character will always just be like this. They can't fight it. Those are the definition of contrivances. Not to mention irresponsible messages that have no bearing on reality and are just ideas that idiots come up with. As I mentioned briefly talking about the statements that relate to mental health and self-improvement, fate literally doesn't exist in real life, so there's no meaning to it in a story unless it's approaching a sci-fi concept or a fundamentalist philosophical interpretations of the physical world and time, or some sort of meta-commentary. But it's really convenient for your dumbass prequel TV show if you theme it around the idea of fate, so you have an easy excuse for your characters to get where they were in Breaking Bad, while also pretending like the story you're telling is deep and meaningful in the process. But anyways, back to this god-awful quote from Gilligan. This stupid fan service moment that he's describing would be incredibly contrived, and a contrivance is the exact opposite of organic storytelling, by definition. Yet he somehow doesn't think that this stupid thing that he thought of is a huge contrivance. No, it's organic, according to him. This is an organic part of the plot. Literally the opposite of what it is. Instead of realizing how fucking awful this idea is himself, he had to be talked out of it by the other writers. And even then, the reason he says that they chose not to do it wasn't because it's a massive fucking contrivance and also just dog shit writing that is nothing but a cheap, shitty, forced fan service moment that has no artistic value. No, none of those much more valid and obvious, straightforward reasons for why they didn't go for it. They chose not to go for it because it would distract from an important scene. I think this quote should, at the very least, tell you that this man is not some walking god, some writing genius. He's just a guy. He's got some talents. He's got some bad, shallow ideas as well, like everyone else on the planet. He doesn't have the expertise to notice them. And it tells me that no one on staff is thinking about contrivances in the first place. No one's like, maybe our story is contrived. No, nobody's worried about that. He is not the greatest writer who has ever lived. Please stop sucking his dick so much. Him and Gold have mediocre philosophical ramblings in this show at best, like what a middle schooler would think of as deep moral ambiguity or whatever. And just equally childish mockeries of human nature. Their stories range from whatever to downright stupid in terms of the messages and themes they present, because they pretend like their understanding of people, of human beings, is so realistic. This story is literally about people that are pigeonholed into a singular identity by fate or by God or whatever, and yet we're supposed to see this as deep or resonant or meaningful? Let me ask you this. This is the litmus test. Have you, personally you, have you learned anything about yourself and about life by watching Better Call Saul? Have you had some sort of profound realization philosophically about your own life, your own relationships, due to the intricate portrayal of life in this show? Or is it just a dumb TV show that doesn't really translate to something truly meaningful to the consumer of the art? It's just entertainment. It's just entertaining to watch these dumb TV characters with their TV character arcs and their TV rules, like being fated into an identity. TV conflicts. And they do put a lot of effort into research and making their world-building elements fairly realistic. Like, their portrayal of court is pretty on point, as I've been told by lawyers and stuff like that, which does deserve props. I appreciate when people actually, like, put in the research, but I'd much sooner argue that Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad tells a much more profound message that reflects real life better than anyone in Better Call Saul does. I guess Gus is pretty consistent between both shows, because he's still, like, he just represents an ideal of things to live by, in a way, even if it's not very deep. Yeah. Let's see. I watched Uncut Gems, finally. That Adam Sandler movie, and it was really long. It was much longer than I was expecting. It's very odd that I watched this and Mitchell's vs. the Machines literally back-to-back in the same day, and they both have fucking Furbies in them. I have not seen a Furby in years, but here we are. This movie is weird. At first, I was into it. I was into the gritty, messy dialogue, and then it just keeps going and going without a clear point or change to it. It's scene after scene of mundane shit, and characters just going like, "Fuck you, motherfucker," just back and forth for minutes on end. There is so much just like people repeating themselves in the same conversation, and no one can communicate anything, and no one listens to anyone. It feels like, you know how, like, people try to make excuses for stuff like this and say, oh, well, it's realistic, as if something being realistic has ever meant that it's good writing or good entertainment value, but it feels kind of real, and that's, like, clearly the goal, to make the interactions and the dialogue feel more real, but it feels real in the same way that, like, watching a Twitter argument feels real. It's like you're watching the dumbest aspects of the human race collide and, like, just implode in a pile of shit. That's what it feels like. You're just watching people be unable to achieve basic communication, and they just get stuck in the most childish of mental traps and, like, I'm right, no, I'm right mentalities. I felt like I was losing brain cells while watching these characters talk to each other. I was pretty bored of this movie by the middle, but I stuck with it during the really low point for me, and it got a little bit more interesting, and then it fucking blew my mind. Blew me away with its stellar third act. This is hard, because I don't think I would want to rewatch this movie again, because it'd be hard to even get through the first hour and a half or hour or so on rewatch, but, like, the final act is just so goddamn good. It's so good. And it's like, there's a moment where Adam Sandler's in his office talking, and it's just like, in that very moment, he starts actually saying some interesting things. The words out of his mouth are suddenly interesting. They're suddenly fascinating. And suddenly the dialogue feels like it has something to say to you. And I just thought, oh my god, the movie is starting now. And sure enough, everything that happens after that point is fucking phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, let's see. I mean,
The only other things I can talk about are things that will just get people angry at me. Like, I watched Death Note, and I have a lot of problems with it, and I think that it has a lot of logical issues, and I take great issue with people thinking of Light Yagami as an intelligent character, when there's a million reasons why he's an incredibly idiotic character. It doesn't make logical decisions, and chiefly, like, he doesn't know things that he should know, / he doesn't make logical decisions. I mean, anything that he does wrong can be attributed to his hubris, but it more or less seems like he just makes bad choices all the time, because there's no reason for him to ever interact with L in any way, and there's no reason for him to do any of this. He should literally just ignore all law enforcement, because they have no chance to catch him unless he tries to interacting with them. So yeah, I mean, he's pretty fucking dumb. And yeah, there's logical issues with, again, because it's another, like, kind of time travel-y thing. Kind of time travel-y thing, because it has time travel elements because of the ability to see when people will die, so that's like foresight abilities that inherently requires time travel. That is a time-space type plot point and ability, which means that we naturally run into a lot of plot holes with that. There's plot holes and inconsistencies with how the Death Note actually functions and manipulates people that have their things written inside it. Like, for example, they can only be made to know, like, perform action. It seems like they can only be made to perform actions that they would have already performed, right? Like, they can't be made to write something that they wouldn't have already written themselves, because they can't write something they don't know. Even if it's that, like, physically, like, say I wanted to make someone write the name Lee, like Lee Jim or whatever. I could make him say, write the name Lee Jim, but if he doesn't know anyone named Lee Jim, then he doesn't write it. Apparently that's how it works, even though that makes no fucking sense in the universe, because he can write out the letters L-E-E. If I had him write the letter L, he would probably be able to do that, so I could just have him write out and spell it out, and then so I could physically force him to make the action, so it doesn't make any sense why he'd be incapable of doing something just because he doesn't consciously know the name of the person. If I'm telling him what the name of it is, it's a complete inconsistency. There's no logic to it. It's so stupid. And beyond that, it's like, characters can only take actions that I guess they were already planning on doing, like, would already be in character, I suppose, but, like, he makes a guy chop off his own finger and then write with it, like, draw symbols with his own blood with his chopped off finger. So it's like, was that guy already going to do that? Like, that was a thought that crossed his mind, that he should chop off his finger and draw dumb symbols on the wall? That was a thought that was in his head, but, like, you couldn't make another guy write a fucking name that he wasn't familiar with? Seriously? Whatever. I mean, it's not a bad show, but there's a lot of dumb shit in it. Most chiefly with the fact that the characters are not as good of detectives as the show pretends like they are, because most of the time the characters just conveniently assume everything that they need to know, and they don't actually logically come to most of their conclusions. They just know, like, they read the script and then they just know 90% of the plot, and then they just give some explanation. They just give some excuse, like, oh, this is the logic that I used to determine this, but that's only the remaining 10%, and it doesn't account for the 90% that they had to just assume by knowing the plot ahead of time from reading the script and cheating. L does this a lot more than Light, but it's all over the place and it's really annoying. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's my thoughts on stuff. Oh my god, my fucking throat is killing me. Jesus Christ. Alright, see ya.